The anti-expectation effect is a powerful psychological tool to take control in social dynamics without even raising your voice. In essence, it consists of doing the opposite of what someone expects, breaking their mental predictions, and creating a moment of psychological vulnerability. Human beings function on expectations. We move through life assuming how others behave. These assumptions are the basis of our comfort, control, and sense of security. But when someone breaks that script, even in the most insignificant way, the brain freezes. There is a pause, a peak of uncertainty. And in that silence, power changes hands. The anti-expectation effect. People expect provocation to provoke anger. Expect nervousness before authority. Expect courtesy in moments of tension. But if, instead of reacting predictably, you become unpredictable, responding to insults with serenity, to pressure with humor, or to threats with indifference, you fracture their sense of control. The mind is agitated when its prediction is broken, trying to rebuild its understanding. And the person who creates that rupture suddenly becomes more interesting, more dominant, more dangerous. This is how master negotiators take over a room without speaking loudly. This is how leaders earn respect without having to demand it. This is how manipulators make others seek their approval by becoming psychologically elusive, indecipherable, unpredictable. The anti-expectation effect works because the brain hates confusion. It rushes to fill the void. And in that moment of disorientation, people become more suggestible, more compliant, more open to influence. When someone cannot define you, they cannot control you. But what is even more dangerous, they often let you control them just to end the discomfort of not knowing what you're going to do next. This effect is not about being strange. It is about being strategically unpredictable and knowing that the mind in front of you cannot resist filling the gaps. The deliberate pause. The deliberate pause is a powerful psychological technique to take control without saying a word. It is the strategic use of silence, the time before or after speaking, to manipulate emotional tension, create authority, and force others to reveal more than they intended. Human beings feel uncomfortable with silence. It makes them feel anxious, insecure, and vulnerable. And in that discomfort, they rush to resolve the tension, even if it means giving up power, secrets, or control. That is what makes the deliberate pause so devastatingly effective. When someone asks a question, most people respond immediately. When they speak, they fill every second with words. But silence, conscious and controlled silence, changes the emotional rhythm. Pausing before speaking makes you seem thoughtful, sensible, and hard to read. Pausing after speaking makes your words float in the air, forcing the other person to stay with them, absorb them, and react to them. The longer the silence, the more pressure builds. And whoever controls that pressure controls the conversation. Negotiators, therapists, interrogators, and experienced dominant leaders use this technique. The pause makes you unpredictable. It gives you time to observe while others reveal themselves. It allows you to listen more and speak less, but with impact. The deliberate pause also makes the other person rethink their own behavior. Have they said too much? Have they not said enough? Are you judging them? Do you agree with them? They don't know. And that uncertainty makes them flexible. It is not about discomfort. It is about calculated moderation. Most people speak to be heard, but those who pause speak so that they are obeyed. Silence becomes a sword that pierces the noise, forcing the other person to bow, to seek your answer, to prove that she is worthy of your next word. The open palm trick. The open palm trick is a powerful nonverbal psychological technique to instantly reduce resistance and generate unconscious trust. It is based on a simple, ancestral truth. When people see your open hands, they instinctively feel safer around you. In essence, this trick uses subtle body language to bypass the thinking brain and influence the emotional brain, the part responsible for fear, threat detection, and visceral reactions. And it works in under a second. Throughout history, showing open hands has been a sign of peace. No weapons, no threats, no deceptions. This primitive association is still alive within our nervous system. When someone hides their hands, the brain perceives danger. But when you gesture with your palms up or open to the sides, even briefly, you send a subconscious message. I'm not a threat. I can be trusted. I am safe. And that single signal can change the way someone sees you, even if they don't know why they feel it. Expert speakers, interrogators, and influencers use this without mentioning it. In a negotiation, showing your hands while speaking suggests transparency. In a tense conversation, placing your palms up while stating an argument makes the other person more likely to agree. Even in a casual interaction, resting your hands with your palms open on the table creates a faster connection than any prepared phrase. And in high-risk situations, showing open palms before delivering bad news can reduce the emotional impact. This trick is also effective in manipulation. Scammers, cult leaders, and con artists use it to feign honesty, knowing that the brain trusts gestures, even if the words are lies. That's why someone can lie directly to your face, but there's something about their body that makes you want to believe them. That something is usually their hands, and once you lay your guard down, it's too late. The anchor of confusion. The anchor of confusion is a subtle way of breaking a person's mental defenses by altering the expected rhythm of the conversation. It consists of saying something deliberately strange, irrelevant, or unexpected just before making a request or conveying an important message. That sudden moment of mental disorientation unbalances the brain, creating a psychological pause in which the conscious mind loses control and the subconscious becomes more receptive to suggestions. In those brief seconds of confusion, influence sneaks in almost unnoticed. The brain relies on patterns to feel safe. When a conversation flows logically, people stay true to their roles: buyer, authority, skeptic, defender. But when that flow is interrupted by something that doesn't fit, the brain freezes. A question like, "Do fish get thirsty?" in the middle of a negotiation causes a small mental glitch. And while the mind restarts, you make your move. Confusion becomes the anchor, softening resistance, lowering defenses, and allowing a different tone to be imposed. This technique appears in strange places. An improvised joke during an interrogation, a childish question in a heated discussion, a surreal observation during a sales pitch. It doesn't have to make sense. In fact, it's better if it doesn't. The goal is not for you to be understood. It is to disturb. And once the disturbance takes hold, the other person's emotional load begins to deplete. Their logic resets, and they begin to respond from a softer, more uncertain place. If used carefully, the anchor of confusion not only shakes someone up, but repositions them. It changes the energy from resistance to reboot, from caution to suggestion. Most people will not even realize what has happened. They will only remember having felt a strange sensation of bewilderment and a strange disposition to agree. The inverse question. The inverse question is a psychological maneuver that returns pressure to the other person by asking them to explain their own position. Instead of defending yourself, you invite them to unravel their assumptions and, by doing so, expose the weakness of their argument. It does not work through confrontation, but by converting curiosity into a trap. When someone challenges you, criticizes you, or tries to exert control, the instinct is to reject. But the inverse question completely eludes that instinct and makes the other person bear the burden of proof. People do not expect to be asked why they think in a certain way. They expect resistance. They expect excuses. But when they say something biting and you simply respond with, "Why do you say that?" or "What makes you think that is true?" it disconcerts them. The burden shifts. Their authority falters. They were prepared to attack, not explain. And the moment they begin to defend themselves, the dynamic is reversed. They're no longer the aggressors. They're the ones who are under the microscope. This technique is disturbingly effective in discussions, interviews, power struggles, and manipulation. It makes others feel that their position is being examined, dissected, questioned, not emotionally but logically. It also forces them to slow the pace, which often leads to contradictions, hesitations, or excessive corrections that reveal uncertainty. The inverse question does not refer to the answer, but to the unraveling. The more someone speaks, the more they reveal their intentions, their insecurities, and gaps in their reasoning. And the less you say, the more serene and controlled you seem. It is a type of silent power, asking instead of answering, observing instead of reacting. Discomfort is created not with offenses but with questions. And in that discomfort, people show who they really are. The echo of a name. The echo of the name is the subtle act of using someone's name throughout a conversation to elude their defenses and provoke a sensation of intimacy, familiarity, and attention. Most people never realize how deeply their name is linked to their sense of identity until someone uses it with almost surgical precision and timing. When someone says your name, especially in a moment of emotional intensity or quiet reflection, your attention immediately focuses on that person. It tells the subconscious, this is about you. In childhood, the name is often the first symbol of recognition and consequence. Whether pronounced with love, anger, or warning, it signaled attention. That pattern never completely disappears. Adults continue reacting in the same way. Alert, receptive, excited. That is why people respond naturally when their name is used in crowded places. That is why they feel closer to those who remember it. And that is why a stranger who repeats it can be strangely comforting or alarmingly persuasive. When used subtly, the echo of the name creates a rhythm of concentration. It can reduce tension in a conflict by making someone feel recognized. It can increase attraction by making the interaction feel more personal. It can increase conformity when inserted in the middle of a petition. I understand you, Marcus. It is an accurate observation, Jenna. They are not only words. They are micro-validations. They disarm without confrontation. They soften without the need for explanations. The trick is not in the frequency, but in the moment in which they are used. If used too frequently, it seems manipulative. If used too soon, it seems forced. But when someone waits, listens, and then repeats your name as if they had been keeping it, as if it belonged to silence, it is recorded more deeply than reason. It is like feeling chosen in a world that forgets so quickly. And at that moment, the name not only identifies you, but opens a door to trust. The decoy option. The decoy option is a psychological trick that influences decisions by offering a third option carefully designed to direct someone toward the one you really want them to choose. It does not force them. It guides them silently and invisibly. The illusion of free will remains intact, but the result has been designed from the beginning. This trick works because the human brain rarely evaluates things in isolation. It compares, contrasts, and opposes one thing with another to determine its value. And when the comparison is rigged, the decision is skewed. Imagine you offer two products. One is expensive and the other is cheap. The expensive one seems unjustified, and the cheap one seems insufficient. But now you introduce a third option, almost as expensive as the high-end one, but clearly worse. Suddenly, the high-end option seems like the best offer. That third option is never meant to be sold. It is destined to fail. It is a setup, and now the real target shines in comparison. This technique is everywhere. In restaurant menus, in subscription plans, in political campaigns, even in labor negotiations. The decoy is not there to compete. It is there to frame. And when someone believes they have ruled something out for themselves, they feel safe, empowered, unaware that they have been manipulated all along. The brain wants to feel that it has made an intelligent and balanced decision. It wants contrast to confirm the logic. The decoy provides it. But it's not just about prices. It works with emotions, choices, and even people. Introduce someone slightly worse, slightly colder, slightly more difficult to deal with, and suddenly the person next to them feels more attractive. The decoy shapes perception silently, effectively, and undetected. Because the best manipulation is not perceived as such, but as a choice. The weight transfer. Weight transfer is the silent shift of physical presence that speaks louder than words. It's not about what is said. It's about where the body leans, how it holds itself, and the moment it moves. Every time a person shifts their weight during conversation, they are revealing something. Power, hesitation, interest, discomfort, and, when done deliberately, the transfer of body weight can control the tacit rhythm of an entire interaction. Most people shift their weight unconsciously. They lean in when they are curious, step back when they feel overwhelmed, sway when they are nervous, but the subconscious captures everything. Leaning forward suddenly can seem like a challenge. Stepping back can seem like a rejection. A still center can seem like certainty. The body speaks before the mouth opens, and always tells the truth, even if the words lie. Used intentionally, the transfer of weight becomes a psychological lever. Lean in slowly as you listen, and the other person will feel listened to. Slightly shift your weight during a disagreement, and you will subtly take power without aggression. Step forward as you ask a question, and the emotional intensity skyrockets, even if your voice remains calm. These changes defy logic and activate primitive parts of the brain trained to read body language for survival purposes. That is why people of high status tend to remain physically stable. Their weight is distributed evenly, without being carried away by emotions. They radiate control. Meanwhile, those who are unsure of themselves sway, spin, move, and betray their thoughts with every movement. He who dominates stillness dominates the room. He who knows when to move dominates attention. And when the pressure increases, he who controls his weight controls the direction of the moment. Because long before decisions are made with the mouth, they are made in the bones. The forward lean and immobility. The forward lean and immobility is a psychological tactic that creates tension, dominance, and control through the use of wordless posture. It begins with a subtle forward lean, enough to indicate commitment or intensity, and then stops completely. No gestures, no blinking, no moving. That sudden stillness, maintained for enough time, creates an invisible pressure that forces the other person to respond, reveal themselves, or back down. The body becomes the message. Silence becomes the trap. Human beings are very sensitive to physical signals, especially when someone leans into their space. This triggers a primitive alert. Something is coming, something important, maybe even dangerous. But when that expected movement stops, when the tilt freezes, the brain locks up. The other person does not know whether to lean back, speak first, or wait to see what happens. That hesitation is power. It breaks the rhythm, disturbs certainty, and causes emotional discomfort. This technique is often used in interrogation rooms, executive boardrooms, or intense conversations between two people. It changes the energy without saying a word. The inclination suggests action. Immobility steals it. And in that stolen space, the other person rushes to fill the void. They move nervously. They talk. They reveal. Silence becomes unbearable because the posture promised something that the moment did not fulfill. What makes the forward lean so effective is how unnatural it feels to the receiver. The instinct is to move, resolve the tension, restore balance. But the person who started the sequence has all the control. They decide when the energy changes. They decide when the words return. Until then, the room belongs to them, and everyone else only reacts to a stillness that feels stronger than sound. Negative visualization. Negative visualization is the mental act of vividly imagining the loss of everything that matters to you. Not to suffer, but to remember what is worthwhile. While most people focus on what they want to gain, this causes the mind to retreat into absence. What if the person you love disappeared tomorrow? What if your hand stopped working? What if the life you complain about disappeared overnight? The trick is not to torture the mind. It is in waking it up with a jolt. The brain adapts to pleasure, to routine, even to love. It becomes numb. What was once a blessing becomes background noise. But when you visualize its destruction, its silence, its cold absence, the nervous system is stirred. Suddenly, that annoying coworker is someone you'd miss. That cheap coffee tastes sacred now. That ordinary morning becomes a miracle simply because you imagined it no longer existed. Negative visualization activates the part of the brain that prepares for threats and emotional losses. But when used intentionally, it creates gratitude in reverse. Instead of waiting for a disaster to happen to appreciate your life, you simulate it in advance. And in doing so, you create depth. Love deepens. Calm returns. Anxiety softens. You remember the sacred in the small. People who practice this become more resilient to real tragedy, not less. They have rehearsed it. They have lived it in their mind. So when the unexpected arrives, and it always arrives, they're less surprised, they feel less shattered. There is strength and pain that they imagined before it arrived. There is a presence and a pain that have already been encountered in silence. It is the psychological version of shielding the soul. By losing everything in the mind, you recover everything in the heart, richer, fuller, and without taking it for granted. The compliment sandwich. The compliment sandwich is a psychological technique that softens criticism by surrounding it with praise. It creates a cushion around the uncomfortable truth, making it easier to accept without resistance or defensiveness. The structure is simple. Start with a compliment, insert the criticism, and end with another compliment. But behind that simplicity hides a deeply manipulative framework that plays with the brain's desire to be approved and its aversion to pain. When people feel praised, they lower their guard. They become more receptive, more open, more emotionally relaxed. But when criticism comes too soon, the ego activates like a trap. The compliment sandwich delays that snap. It delays the feeling of threat by wrapping the negative in the warmth of validation. The first compliment disarms. The criticism slips in while the defenses are still asleep. And the final compliment makes the person leave feeling seen. Even if what was said in the middle was hurtful, this method is used by managers, parents, coaches, and manipulators. It works because the emotional brain remembers more how it felt than what was actually said. If someone leaves feeling appreciated, they're less likely to obsess over the pain of what they have been corrected on. The structure of the sandwich keeps their self-esteem intact while giving them the necessary blow. It's like hiding medicine inside candy. Most don't even realize they've received something bitter until they've already swallowed it. But the power of this technique depends on subtlety. If the praise seems false or forced, the whole strategy collapses. But when done with precision, it becomes a tool of influence, allowing harsh truths to be heard without negative reactions and leaving people grateful to the person who has rejected them. The because trigger. The because trigger is the invisible shortcut to human conformity. It doesn't work because the reason that follows it is logical. It works because the mind is trained to obey the word itself. When someone hears because, the brain relaxes its resistance and prepares to accept what comes next. Even if the reason is completely irrational, the trigger is not in the explanation. It is in the signal that an explanation is coming. This reflex is ancient. From early childhood, people are conditioned to respond to because as justification, authority, or a reason. You have to do this because I told you so. We are going home because it's late. It becomes a mental signal that turns off questioning and activates obedience. And that conditioning does not disappear. It hides in adult conversations, negotiations, and persuasion tactics, silently reprogramming judgment in the background. Studies have shown that people are much more likely to say yes when a request is followed by because, even if the reasoning makes little sense. Can I go ahead because I have to make a copy? More conformity is obtained than with the same request without reason. Even if the reason is obvious and provides no new information, the word itself is enough. In conversation, this trigger becomes a subtle control tool. Add, because before making a request, before giving advice, before expressing an opinion, and the statement will seem more grounded, rational, and acceptable. It gives weight even to the weakest argument. We should leave now because it seems like the right thing to me. I think you're wrong because this makes no sense. The structure eludes resistance, not with force, but with fluidity. The power of the because trigger does not reside in truth. It resides in the opportune moment. At the moment when doubt may arise, This single word diverts the course of thought enough to guide it elsewhere. The nod. The nod is a psychological signal that silently generates agreement by triggering the brain's natural tendency to imitate what it sees. It is the act of nodding subtly while speaking, especially when stating something that you want the other person to agree with. And as human beings are programmed to imitate behavior, the person in front of us will often start nodding without even realizing it. But what begins as physical imitation quickly becomes mental alignment. First the body nods, and then the mind. Nodding is a primitive signal of yes. And the moment someone sees it, their brain associates it with approval, correctness, and comfort. When that signal occurs during a statement, such as "this is the best decision for both of us," or "you know what I mean, right?" the body agrees before logic has a chance to object. It is the influence of rhythm, manipulation through movement, a nonverbal suggestion that is deeply implanted in the nervous system and flourishes in the form of consent. This trick is used in interviews, sales meetings, confrontations, and even therapy. It is invisible. It is silent, but it creates a powerful underground current of psychological impulse. The brain does not like to feel out of sync with the body. That is why, when the head starts to nod, even involuntarily, the mind rushes to make sense of the gesture by seeking agreement with what is being said. The nod becomes proof for oneself. What makes a simple nod so dangerous is its apparent innocence. There are no harsh words, no tension, just a gentle movement that makes the other person lean forward, listen more, agree more, and leave the conversation convinced that it was their idea from the beginning, without realizing that their body responded before their mind had a chance to do so. The silent gaze. The silent gaze is the tacit confrontation that says everything without saying a word. It is the moment when someone looks at you, not with emotion, not with threat, but with stillness, and the whole room tenses. It is not aggressive. It is not warm. It simply is. And in that space, silence becomes heavier than sound, heavier than discussion, heavier than an apology. People are uncomfortable being stared at for too long. The eyes are where we hide the least and where we feel the most. When someone refuses to fill the space with words, explanations, or noise and simply looks calmly, without blinking, the rhythm of normal interaction is dismantled. Silence becomes a void. The longer it lasts, the more the mind begins to crumble. Have I said something wrong? Are they angry? Do they know something that I don't? The brain floods the void with fear, guilt, or curiosity. In discussions, a silent gaze inverts the power. While the others raise their voices, defend their position, or justify their emotions, whoever says nothing and observes gains ground. It forces the other to carry the weight of both sides. In negotiations, it breaks impulse. In manipulation, it creates pressure. In intimacy, it deepens connection. Because being seen without interruptions is one of the most intense human experiences. But the trick isn't how the gaze is directed. Not with the eyes wide, open, or narrowed, just with a soft and calm presence. As if the person were listening with their whole body. As if they had stopped blinking because words no longer matter. It is then when the gaze becomes a mirror. And what the other person sees in it is their own mind, their own guilt, their own story crumbling under silent attention. The ambiguous compliment. The ambiguous compliment is a psychological tactic that disorients the receiver by offering praise wrapped in a subtle insult. It is a statement that seems flattering, but encloses a background of judgment, comparison, or disdain. The brilliance of this technique lies in its ambiguity. It creates emotional confusion. The mind does not know whether to feel proud or offended. And while that internal conflict brews, whoever speaks maintains control. When someone says, "You are surprisingly eloquent for someone of your age," or "I did not expect you to do such a good job," the initial reaction may be gratitude, but seconds later the second blow arrives. The tacit insinuation that failure was expected, that you're not normally impressive, that you are the exception to some tacit rule, and suddenly your self-esteem falters. You smile politely, but a part of you begins to shrink. This tactic is used to assert dominance, undermine confidence, or establish a subtle superiority without open confrontation. It is common in passive-aggressive power games, manipulative friendships, competitive workplaces, and toxic relationships. The objective is not to insult openly. It is to destabilize, to make the other person question their position, provoke insecurity while still showing a mask of kindness. What makes ambiguous compliments so effective is that they do not offer a clear answer. If you defend yourself, you seem too sensitive. If you give thanks, you accept the insult. If you remain silent, the insult endures. The damage is not evident. It is psychological. A small seed of doubt planted under the surface that continues growing long after the conversation ends. The one who speaks leaves appearing generous, while the one who listens leaves with a smile that does not seem entirely sincere. The dominant step. The dominant step does not have to do with speed, stride, or physical size. It is about the silent claim of space. It is the way in which a person moves through a room as if it were theirs, without asking permission, without asking for recognition, and without rushing. People notice it before realizing. The air changes, conversations stop, heads turn, not because of the volume, but because of something more intense, presence. Most people walk as if trying to get somewhere. The dominant step moves as if already there. Each step is measured, neither too fast nor too slow. The arms swing naturally, but with intention. The chin is slightly raised, never rigid, never shy. The eyes scan horizontally, without abrupt movement. The back is straight and firm, as if anchored by its own gravity. Without apologies or tension, only total control of direction, time, and space. It is not acting, it is a signal. In social hierarchies, the one who controls the rhythm controls perception. Hurried movements denote inferior status, urgency, nervousness, submission. Slow, deliberate movements convey the opposite. Confidence, calm, and control. The body says, "This is my place. I fear nothing. I do not answer to anyone." Dominant walking is more effective in transition spaces, doors, hallways, entrances. The way a person enters a room determines how others treat them in the next hour. When they are doubtful, people ignore them. When they burst in, people become guarded. But when they enter with composure and aplomb, people adapt. They reposition themselves without even realizing it. They make space. What makes dominant walking so influential is that it operates below language. It is animal, instinctive, evolutionary. People respond to it not because they are impressed, but because something inside them recognizes what they see. It is not a person who is showing off. It is a person who does not need to do it. The shrinking response. The withdrawal response is a psychological tactic that reverses the power dynamic by offering less than expected. Fewer words, less emotion, a minimal reaction. It is the art of doing less to say more. In a world where people struggle to be heard, whoever responds with moderation gains unexpected control. The silence between words becomes stronger than any diatribe, and the absence of explanations becomes a weapon of influence. When someone launches a challenge, demand, or accusation, they expect a response. They expect a defense. But when the answer is reduced to a perhaps in a low voice, a slow nod, or a single incomplete phrase, the tension changes. The interlocutor begins to lean forward to try to fill the void. He over-explains, retracts, or insists more because the evasive answer has not given him what he sought. That lack becomes influence. It creates discomfort, and in that discomfort, people begin to reveal more than they intended. This technique thrives in conflicts, manipulation, negotiation, and emotional power struggles. When emotions intensify, most people expand. They speak louder, gesticulate more, try to dominate. But whoever withdraws, whoever remains still, speaks less, refrains from reacting, becomes the center of gravity. Everyone else moves around him. The response of withdrawing does not beg for attention. Strength, not by shouting, but by disappearing enough to be chased. And that pursuit is everything. Because once the other person pursues understanding, approval, or clarity, they have already given up control. He leans, fills the voids, and tries to resolve the tension that you left in the air. Meanwhile, you say almost nothing, but you have all the power. The trick of how would you feel? The trick of how would you feel is the psychological switch that takes someone out of defense and puts them directly in empathy. It does not demand agreement. It does not attack logic. It completely evades resistance by diverting attention inward. The moment someone is asked, "How would you feel if that happened to you?" their brain stops arguing and starts imagining. And that is where everything changes. Most people defend their actions by rationalizing them. They explain. They justify. They distance themselves. But when they're asked how they would feel in the same situation, something collapses. Their shield turns inward. Now they imagine themselves in the place of others. It is no longer just theory. It is personal. The mind that resisted is now forced to feel. And when feelings come into play, logic bends. This trick works because it activates one of the brain's most primitive systems, specular empathy. It is the same response that makes people feel bad when they see someone suffering or crying in a movie. It creates an internal discomfort, not because they are wrong, but because they have momentarily become the victim of their own story. That change produces shame, hesitation, tenderness. In a conflict, this question is a tactical weapon. It disarms without escalating. It does not accuse, it reflects. And since it formulates a question, it preserves dignity. But inside, it changes everything. Even the most moralistic mind can falter under its weight. Not immediately, but something remains engraved. It persists. Later, it silently gnaws at the ego. Manipulators use it to induce guilt. Therapists use it to awaken consciousness. Parents use it to teach morality. Friends use it to ask for justice. It is soft but not weak. It is a mirror. And when someone is forced to look at themselves in it, they often don't like what they see. The anchoring effect. The anchoring effect is a psychological trap that silently dictates how people perceive value simply by first introducing a number or an idea. It does not matter if the anchor is random or absurd. Once planted, it shapes all subsequent judgments. The brain does not restart. It compares. And that first information becomes the invisible rule by which all other options are measured. People believe they are being rational, but they're only reacting to the anchor. When someone hears that something usually costs $10,000, even if it is a lie, their brain clings to that figure. So when the price drops to $5,000, it seems like a bargain because the comparison was rigged. The anchor was not the truth. It was the frame. And from that frame, all value is distorted. That is why sellers always start high. That is why negotiators make the first offer. Why are false discounts exciting? The first number becomes reality, whether deserved or not. But it is not just about money. Anchors work with time, status, expectations, and emotions. If you say something is urgent, the person suddenly feels pressured. Say, most people finish in 5 minutes, so 10 minutes seems like failure. The anchor doesn't have to be true. It just has to arrive first. And once it does, everything else is dragged into its orbit. This technique is used in courts, advertising, relationships, and manipulation. It is silent, fast, and effective. People rarely ask where their standard comes from. They simply react to it. The trick is to go first. Because once someone's mind is anchored, even a bad deal seems fair. Even a lie seems reasonable. And when they realize it wasn't, they have already accepted the unexpected agreement. The unexpected agreement is the psychological jolt that unbalances someone by giving them exactly what they were willing to fight for. In a world addicted to discussion, confrontation is expected, especially when emotions run high. But when someone disarms the tension by saying, "You are right," or "I agree with that," at the precise moment when conflict arises, the other person's aggressiveness is cut off at the root. Suddenly, the air is taken from his lungs and his script no longer fits. This trick works because most people don't argue to be correct. They argue to be heard, to be validated, to be seen. When they prepare for resistance and instead receive agreement, this satisfies the ego faster than conflict would. It causes confusion. Their energy was building up for a fight, but now there is nothing to fight. The moment becomes awkward, open, vulnerable, and in that pause, the conversation can be redirected. The key is when and how agreement is expressed. It is not about surrendering or feigning weakness. It is about strategic alignment. You are right. This situation is frustrating. I agree. It doesn't seem fair at all. These phrases change the emotional battlefield. The attacker becomes an ally. And once the emotional charge decreases, influence slips silently. Because after someone feels understood, they're much more willing to understand. The unexpected agreement is a control tool disguised as humility. It appeases conflict without submission, by peace without apologies. And in some cases, it even traps manipulators because once they believe they have won, they let down their guard. That is when the true message can be conveyed. Calmly, sharply, and without resistance. People expect a defense. Prepare for a rejection. But when agreement appears, the rules of the moment are rewritten. The late assent. The late assent is a psychological gesture that silently tilts conversations in your favor, using time to create the illusion of deep agreement or thoughtful validation. Unlike a normal nod, which occurs instantly and automatically, the delayed nod waits a moment longer than normal and then arrives. That brief pause before the movement triggers something powerful in the other person's brain. It not only says, I agree, but I have really considered what you just said, and I still agree, and that makes people feel deeply understood. Human beings crave validation. When someone nods too quickly, it can seem dismissive, like a reflex. But when the nod arrives after a moment of silence, after constant eye contact, after the weight of your words settles, it feels earned. That hesitation transforms the nod into a reward. It makes the speaker feel that they have just said something meaningful. And when people believe they are understood on a deeper level, they soften, trust, and reveal more. This technique is used discreetly by therapists, mediators, interrogators, and skilled conversationalists. It makes people open up faster, trust more deeply, and agree more readily. The person who makes the delayed nod speaks less, but controls more. With a single gesture, they sow the idea. I am with you. I listen to you. You are right. And with that belief, people let their guard down even when they shouldn't. But the delayed nod can also deceive. It can be used to feign empathy, to manipulate, to create false connection. The speaker believes that they have found a connection, but in reality, they have entered a controlled emotional environment in which every movement has been calculated. It did not come from the heart. It came from strategy. And yet, it still works. Because in that moment of stillness, most people don't realize they have already surrendered trust. The pause in nearby space. The pause in the nearby space is the tacit pressure that occurs when physical proximity meets deliberate silence. It's not about being close. It's about how long someone stays there without speaking. Just a few more centimeters. Just a few more seconds. And the atmosphere changes. The heart accelerates. Thoughts stir. The brain begins to look for meaning in silence. And that is precisely where control begins. Most people are trained to feel silence, especially when they are face to face. Silence is uncomfortable. The closer the bodies are, the stronger the silence becomes. It's not just a pause. It is a wordless confrontation, a moment in which everything unsaid becomes unbearable. When someone approaches and says nothing, the tension builds like a storm behind glass, and almost always the other person speaks first. This technique is often used in interrogation rooms, high-stakes negotiations, and manipulation tactics, but it does not require aggression. It requires stillness. The key is not to intimidate. It is about staying calm, being present, and emotionally neutral while the other person struggles with the pressure of proximity. In that space of silence, their mind floods with doubts. Have I said too much? Do they know what I'm hiding? What are you waiting for? And suddenly, the silence grows stronger than any accusation. Even outside conflict, a pause in a small space can cause emotional vulnerability. In romance, it creates magnetic tension. In friendship, it indicates that one is listening closely. In leadership, It affirms power without dominating, but reveals something. Because when the mouth stays closed and the distance stays close, the other person starts to show their cards. Not through what they say, but through what they cannot help saying next. The synchronized double blink. The synchronized double blink is a nonverbal trick that creates a rapid connection and subconscious alignment through a reflection that goes unnoticed. The blink. It consists of matching someone's blinking rhythm, specifically their double blink, and synchronizing your behavior subtly with it. The brain perceives patterns well before the conscious mind. And when someone imitates your actions, it creates the disturbing but comforting illusion that you are in tune. That illusion opens doors to emotions without needing to say a word. Blinking is one of the most primitive and unconscious acts humans do. It reflects our internal state. Nervousness, concentration, boredom, confidence. And when someone realizes that another person is blinking at the same rate as them, especially a rare double blink, their subconscious registers familiarity. The person begins to feel a strange connection, as if they understood them on a level beyond language. It feels like resonance, like a flow, and, most importantly, it feels safe. This technique is almost never perceived consciously, and that is precisely why it's so effective. It is used by hypnotists, persuaders, and even manipulators to circumvent verbal resistance and create tacit trust. The double blink, when imitated carefully and not immediately, conveys that we are the same. We move the same. We are in tune. And once that belief settles, it becomes easier to guide someone's emotions, opinions, and decisions. The real power lies in the opportune moment. Imitating blinking too quickly seems forced, too slow, and it loses its effect. But when delayed enough to seem natural, the impact is greater. The other person does not realize that they are opening up. They do not know that they are imitating more, but they do and feel closer. The sync becomes an invisible influence that hides in the most human reflection of all, the incomplete sentence. The incomplete sentence is the ingenious use of unfinished thoughts to arouse curiosity and provoke participation. It is not about giving all the details, but about leaving something unsaid that captures attention and draws one into the narration. When a sentence is left in the air without a conclusion, a mental void is created that demands filling, transforming passive listening into active participation. In essence, the incomplete sentence exploits our desire for closure. Our brains are programmed to complete patterns and resolve ambiguities. When someone hears an unfinished thought, the mind jumps to fill the void, often adding layers of personal interpretation, emotion, and meaning. This technique turns every conversation into a collaborative creation, since the listener becomes an involuntary co-author to the dialogue. That space in which words falter is, in fact, a trigger that pulls the strings of imagination and memory. This method thrives in moments of emotional intensity. When a speaker lets his sentence hang, it endures, resonating with what was left unsaid. The listener's mind accelerates, guessing, yearning to know more, to resolve the tension between expression and silence. Each incomplete sentence takes advantage of the inherent resistance of the human being to uncertainty, taking advantage of that discomfort and transforming it into a powerful tool for connection. The effect is subtle but compelling, a silent recognition that not everything has to be said and that sometimes what is unsaid is what is heard most. In that delicate balance between silence and language, true dialogue begins, resonating with tacit truths and shared understandings. The incomplete phrase reminds us that our mind loves to finish what life leaves pending, and in doing so, it writes its own stories from fragments left behind. The eyebrow-raising trigger. The eyebrow-raising trigger is a subtle psychological signal that awakens curiosity, indicates intrigue, and silently pressures the other person to keep talking or prove their worth. Is the slight upward movement of the eyebrows at the exact moment someone says something revealing, questionable, or emotionally charged. That single gesture, silent and small, sends a direct message to their subconscious. I have noticed. Go ahead. Explain yourself. And as the human mind craves approval and fears judgment, the response is almost always the same. Revelation. The eyebrows are one of the most expressive parts of a human face. They react faster than words. A quick raise can show surprise, interest, skepticism, or defiance, all without a word. But when used deliberately, raising the eyebrows becomes a psychological lever. Someone shares an opinion, a confession, or even a lie, and you don't nod, you don't interrupt, you just raise your eyebrows and keep your gaze fixed. The silence does the rest. The brain panics in the void, and the interlocutor begins to fill it, often with information that they did not intend to share. This technique is used by expert interrogators, therapists, negotiators, and emotional manipulators. It works because it takes advantage of the fear of being misunderstood or judged. Raised eyebrows do not confirm or deny anything. They simply stay there waiting, and in that suspended reaction, the other person begins to fall apart. Clarifies, expands, goes backwards, not because they have been asked, but because they feel observed and not fully approved. The eyebrow raise doesn't need to be dramatic. In fact, the more subtle it is, the more powerful it becomes. Goes unnoticed. It is not perceived as confrontation. It is perceived as silent scrutiny. And in the silence that follows, the truth often comes to light, not because of pressure, but because of the unbearable need to fill that small void that the question has left. The tacit link is the invisible thread that connects two people without a single word being exchanged. It is formed in the space between glances, in the pauses between sentences, in the silent understanding that something significant is happening beneath the surface. It is not based on logic or shared opinions. It is based on recognition, on a silent recognition that says you feel it too. This link is not created through what is said, but through what does not need saying. It is the way two people capture the same emotional rhythm without planning it. The way one person's eyes soften and the other simply knows what it means. It is the look that crosses to the other side of the room when everyone else is laughing. But you both understand that the joke hides something darker. It is the type of connection that does not need explanation because it already exists. The tacit link is formed in moments of shared vulnerability, tension, or deep resonance. In a crisis, when everything breaks down and someone simply sits next to you in silence, it forms. In a crowded place, when a fleeting glance lingers a little longer than normal and neither of you looks away, it forms. When someone starts a sentence and the other finishes it without trying, it is already there. This type of bond is deeply emotional, but dangerously difficult to explain. It does not need validation. There is no need to demonstrate, explain, or defend feelings. It simply exists, and that is what makes it powerful. Because in a world obsessed with over-talking, over-sharing, and over-demonstrating, the tacit bond stands as a silent challenge. It is subtle, yet unforgettable. And once it is formed, it can haunt a person because no conversation can replicate the feeling of being truly understood without a single word. The trick of, "Can you do me a favor?" The trick of, "Can you do me a favor?" is a psychological trap disguised as a polite request. It works by triggering a powerful social reflex, the need to be seen as helpful, pleasant, and kind even before revealing the true request. The genius of this technique lies in how it creates an emotional hook before the logical mind kicks in. When someone hears those words, their brain does not calculate the cost. It calculates the social risk. Saying no seems rude, and most people prefer to feel uncomfortable rather than confront someone. The moment someone says, "Can you do me a favor?" the listener instinctively leans forward. There is tension, curiosity, and subtle moral pressure. Most people say sure before they even know what they are agreeing to. That yes is not to the favor. It is to the relationship, to the image they want to protect, to the feeling of being good. And once that verbal commitment has been made, backing down becomes more difficult. The trap is already closed. Manipulators, salespeople, and persuasive negotiators use this trick to get rules followed without resorting to force. A psychological contract is created. You have agreed to help, so now you are emotionally committed. And even if the favor is greater than expected, most people still go ahead just to be consistent with their previous response. The trick uses the rejection of discomfort as a weapon. No one wants to seem selfish or uncooperative, especially after saying yes in front of another person. The real danger is how insignificant it seems. It starts with 5 harmless words. But once the door is opened, the person on the other side has already entered. Not because they have been forced, but because saying yes has made them feel like the kind of person who would not say no. The change of roles. The change of roles is the psychological twist that reverses power. Not by force, but by changing perception. It is the moment when someone subtly invites another person to put themselves in their place. Not through accusations, but through perspective. It is not about making someone feel guilty. It is about silently handing the emotional mirror to the other and letting them see themselves from the outside. The most disarming thing is that they don't even realize they have switched roles until it's too late to undo it. It starts with a question, a story, or a scenario. What would you have done in their place? Imagine that the person you love was treated like that. They are not attacks, they are invitations. And since they don't sound confrontational, defenses are not raised. Instead, the brain goes into simulation mode. It starts to feel. And when someone feels what the other party felt, everything changes. The exchange of roles is powerful in conflicts because it does not shout, it reflects. It does not demand an apology, it sows awareness. In short, the aggressor becomes the victim. The critic becomes the misunderstood. The manipulator becomes the manipulated. It happens in silence, in the imagination, in those fleeting seconds when someone stops, not because they have lost the discussion, but because they have just seen it. This change is often used by communication teachers, therapists, negotiators, even scammers, because once someone has emotionally put themselves in the other's place, their certainty vanishes. Their posture softens. They begin to question their own reactions, not because they have been told, but because they have felt the other. And it is more difficult to argue with feelings than facts. That is the genius of role reversal. It does not confront the ego. It lets the ego confront itself. The scarcity frame. The scarcity frame is a psychological manipulation that increases desire by making something appear limited, exclusive, or about to disappear. It takes advantage of a primal fear, the fear of missing out. When something seems rare, people stop evaluating its true value and start chasing it simply because they believe they may miss the opportunity. The brain does not ask itself, "Do I need this?" It shouts, "What if I never get another chance?" Scarcity distorts perception. A product of which there are only 5 units left in stock seems more valuable than the same product with an unlimited supply. A person who suddenly walks away seems more attractive than one who is always available. A job, an appointment, a secret invitation. Once it is framed as something rare, urgency takes over and logic disappears. People rush to secure it, not because it is the right thing to do, but because it could disappear. That fear of loss becomes stronger than any real desire for gain. Salesmen, manipulators, and high-pressure closers constantly use this trick. They do not just sell the product, they sell the time. Only 2 hours left. Places are limited. I do not usually do this. It forces people to make emotional, not rational decisions. And in relationships, this frame is used in a more dangerous way. Someone becomes cold, inaccessible, elusive, and suddenly their attention becomes a prize, not because it has been earned, but because it is denied. The scarcity frame reconfigures the brain, confusing urgency with value. The less accessible something seems, the more people chase it. It does not matter if it is useful, healthy, or even desired. What matters is that it may disappear. And once someone feels that they are about to lose something, they will do almost anything to keep it, even if they never really needed it in the first place. The pseudo-confession. The pseudo-confession is the illusion of vulnerability designed to unlock real vulnerability in others. It sounds like honesty. It feels like intimacy, but Deep down, it is a calculated move. An emotional decoy intended to lower defenses, invite trust, and extract the truth without ever giving it. The person who uses it seems open, disarmed, even hurt. But what they reveal is not truth. It is bait. This trick works because human beings are programmed to reflect vulnerability. When someone opens up, even slightly, the listener's subconscious begins to mimic it. Emotional symmetry is activated. If they are sincere, I can be too. But the genius of the pseudo-confession is that it is not real. It is prepared, often harmless, vague, or even totally invented. I used to be terrible in relationships. I have made some truly serious mistakes in the past. I don't tell many people, but these statements sound raw, though they don't reveal anything concrete. No names, no consequences, just an appearance of depth. Meanwhile, the other person, now softer and confident, begins to offer real truths, secrets, stories, confessions with emotional weight because they feel safe. They feel seen. They feel that it is a mutual moment. But it is not. It's a trap. The pseudo-confession never had to do with honesty. It had to do with control. It creates an emotional imbalance in which one person feels exposed while the other remains protected behind a mask of false frankness. It is often used by manipulators, seducers, and even leaders to create quick emotional bonds. But the damage appears later, when the person who is given everything realizes that they have received nothing in return, because what seemed like a moment of sheer vulnerability was actually a unilateral performance. And once the truth of that imbalance is discovered, it is difficult to trust someone who seems so real again. The verbal mirror. The verbal mirror is a psychological technique that creates an instant connection by reflecting someone's exact words. It works by triggering a deep, unconscious recognition. You sound like me, so you must understand me. When people hear their own language repeated, even if it is just a phrase or a single word, they feel heard, validated, and emotionally aligned. It is not flattery, it is familiarity. And the human brain is attracted to everything that is familiar to it. In high-stakes conversations, discussions, negotiations, or even therapy, people want to feel they are in control. They want to feel that their point of view is recognized. The verbal mirror bypasses their defenses by returning their own language to them, not as mockery, but as a subtle imitation. If someone says, "I feel that no one listens to what I am really trying to say," and you respond, "What you are really trying to say is important," something clicks in their nervous system. You have not only responded, but reflected, and that reflection brings them closer. This technique works even better when tension is high. People stop listening when emotions intensify, but reflecting their exact words forces them to slow down, recognize their own thoughts, and unconsciously lower their guard. It doesn't matter if you agree. What matters is that you have reflected. That simple gesture makes the interlocutor feel that their words matter. And when someone feels understood, they become more persuadable. Manipulators, hostage negotiators, and communication experts use verbal mirroring not to agree, but to control, disarm, and build a bridge made entirely with the other person's own words. And once that bridge is built, people often cross it willingly, believing they have found someone who sees them, not realizing that it is only their reflection staring at them. The question bounce. The question bounce is the conversational deviation that returns pressure to the other person effortlessly, invisibly, and with surgical precision. It is not evasion. It is redirection. And when used correctly, it allows someone to evade responsibility, hide their intentions, or assert dominance without appearing evasive. The person who asks questions maintains control. The one who answers reveals everything. This trick begins with subtlety. Someone asks, "Why did you say that?" Instead of answering directly, the other responds, "What led you to ask that?" A question for another. And so, without further ado, the emotional weight shifts. Now, whoever asked the original question is explaining themselves, revealing their motives, and exposing their emotional position, all while believing that they are still the one in control. But it is not like that. It has just been bounced back. The genius of bouncing questions lies in its naturalness. It is not seen as resistance, but curiosity. It flatters the ego of the asker. You are very interesting. I want to understand you. Meanwhile, the bouncer collects information, gains time, and stays emotionally protected. This is how negotiators avoid commitment. How manipulators get information and charmers stay mysterious without seeming cold. Even in a conflict, the bouncing of questions neutralizes the heat. Instead of defending a position, it shifts the focus. Why are you so angry? What seems unfair to you? That shift reconfigures the emotional impulse. The other person begins to speak, vent, unravel, while the bouncer simply listens, collects, and stays impassive. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it is strategic. Sometimes it is survival. But once someone masters bouncing, they can guide any conversation without revealing more than desired. Because when questions are shields, silence isn't needed to stay hidden. Only a well-placed mirror. The echo of status. The echo of status is a tactic that imitates someone's perceived social rank, tone, or language to create a connection or manipulate it. It is based on the idea that people feel safer with others who reflect their identity, confidence, or position. By echoing someone's subtle status signals, how they speak, the vocabulary they use, and how they behave, a powerful subconscious response is triggered. This person is like me. He understands me. People constantly measure status, not only by income or appearance, but through micro-signals like posture, way of expressing themselves, rhythm, and even the type of humor they use. When a high-status person hears their behavioral patterns reflected, they relax. The mirror validates power. It is a sign of alliance, familiarity, even admiration. And that validation opens doors, lowers defenses, and increases influence without challenging authority directly. But real manipulation occurs when the echo isn't flattery. It's about control. A skilled operator will echo status enough to create comfort, while subtly inserting dominance. If someone speaks formally, the echo begins formally, but changes slightly to seem more confident. If someone is relaxed, the echo joins in and then speeds the pace a bit. It's not about becoming them. It's about building a bridge and then guiding them across. This technique is used in job interviews, high-stakes sales, political persuasion, and manipulation. The person who is imitated often feels strangely understood, even admired, when in reality they're being carefully studied and copied. The status echo not only gains trust, it builds a hierarchy hidden under the illusion of similarity. And once someone feels the other person is just like them, they rarely realize who's really in control. The strategy of asking too much. The strategy of asking for too much consists of making an initial request so extreme, so excessive, that anything less that comes afterward seems reasonable in comparison. It's not about getting an extravagant demand. It's about presenting the next as relief. It plays with a deep psychological flaw. Human beings do not evaluate requests in an isolated way. They compare. They contrast. They calibrate their disposition based on what happened before, not what is presented by itself. This tactic is used everywhere by salespeople, negotiators, manipulators, and even children. A child asks to stay out all night. The parents say no. The child yields and asks to stay until midnight. Suddenly, both feel they have won. But, in reality, the second request was the real objective from the beginning. The first request was never intended to succeed. Its goal was to change the balance. Asking for too much works because it manipulates emotional contrast. The first request creates tension, discomfort, resistance. Then, when the second request is made, that tension is released. The other person feels generous, even if they have given only slightly more than they would normally. It is not logic that drives the yes. It is relief. That is why it is so dangerous to ask for too much in expert hands. It doesn't just work in negotiation. It works in relationships, in manipulation, in controlling the dynamic. A person demands emotional work, constant attention, or total access. When he yields and asks for only a little more time, the other party agrees because they have been prepared to see that smaller request as a sign of clemency, not as manipulation. The power of this strategy is not in the request, but in the preparation. And once someone is conditioned to see unreasonable things as something not so bad, it becomes easier to control them. Not because they are weak, but because they never intended to say yes to the first demand. The first to speak loses control. The first to speak losing control is a high-risk psychological tactic based on the brutal power of silence. It is used in negotiations, confrontations, and moments of tension in which both parties want something, but only one is willing to wait. The idea is simple. The person who breaks the silence first usually yields something, loses ground, or reveals weakness. However, in practice, it is not simple at all, because silence is unbearable. Human beings are programmed to fear discomfort. In intense situations, silence becomes more intense with each passing second. It is perceived as pressure, as failure, as loss of control. The discomfort leads most people to speak just so that the silence ends. But when they do, they almost always reveal too much. They fill the space with explanations, with concessions, with emotional overflows. And the person who has remained silent leaves with more advantage, more information, more power. This rule is used by elite negotiators, military interrogators, and expert manipulators. It does not matter who starts the conversation. What matters is who breaks the silence. When both parties stare at each other across the table, waiting for the other to blink, the one who speaks first breaks the psychological tie and often does so from anxiety, not strategy. A discount, an apology, an unnecessary detail. Everything is filtered in those seconds of pressure. Silence is the battlefield. Most people cannot stand it, but those who can win without having to raise their voice. They let the other person rush to fill the void. And in doing so, they allow them to reveal everything they shouldn't have said, not by force, but by waiting, listening, and letting silence speak for them. The emotional touch. The emotional touch is subtly triggering a specific emotion in another person, not through confrontation, but with precision. It's not about staging any scene. It's about knowing exactly which emotional button to push and when. To change a conversation's tone, gain control, or provoke a deeper reaction. Like a finger tapping a glass of water, it breaks nothing. It just creates waves that move everything beneath. People are emotional creatures before they are rational. A single sentence, a certain tone, and a well-placed pause can awaken a whole memory, insecurity, or longing. The emotional touch aims at that fragility with precision. It doesn't scream. It whispers exactly what the person wasn't ready to hear or what they desperately wanted. You always try so hard to be perfect. It's okay to admit that it hurts. You don't have to pretend now. They're not accusations. They're silent detonations. This technique is powerful because it avoids discussion. The moment someone is emotionally affected, logic fades. Their walls crack. They either soften or lash out. But in any case, they reveal themselves. The emotional touch is not about volume or dominance. It's about precision. Knowing that a phrase spoken with calm intensity will create more chaos or connection than a lecture. Expert manipulators use it to make people cry, confess, or obey. Therapists use it to achieve breakthroughs. Lovers use it to get closer or to separate. The difference lies in the intention. But the effect is always the same: control. Because when someone is dominated by emotion, they're no longer in command. And whoever has touched their weak spot, even if only once and gently, becomes the one directing everything that comes after. The interruption with a cough. The interruption with cough is a psychological interruption technique that derails the thread of someone's thoughts and regains control of the conversation without having to say a single word. It is a small, deliberate interruption, a slight cough, a clearing of the throat, a subtle vocal pause that creates just the right disturbance to restore the emotional momentum in your favor. It doesn't seem aggressive. It doesn't seem confrontational, but it works because the human mind clings to rhythm. And when that rhythm breaks, concentration collapses. In intense discussions, power struggles, or moments when someone dominates, people get carried away. They accumulate emotional tension. They speak faster, louder, with more confidence. And then, suddenly, a cough interrupts. Just a brief sound, enough to make them stop, even if only for a second. That second is all it takes to shift control. The interlocutor hesitates. The rhythm is broken. The energy they were generating loses strength, and you are free to redirect the conversation. This trick is especially effective when the other person is trying to verbally corner you, throwing accusations, lecturing, or pressuring you. Do not match their volume. Do not interrupt with words. Simply cough, clear your throat, make a small sound that seems incidental but has the effect of a reset button. His speech falters, his momentum fades, and you calmly and precisely regain control. Used in judicial interrogations, manipulative conversations, and tactical interviews, the cough interruption is subtle enough to go unnoticed, but strong enough to fracture emotional momentum. It's the kind of move that makes people forget where they were going, forget how powerful they sounded, forget what they were about to demand. Not because they were wrong, but because their rhythm has been broken and their mind has not been able to keep up. The false time limit. The false time limit is a silent pressure bomb that forces decisions to obey or to confess, not demanding urgency, but pretending that there is no time left. It is the illusion of a window closing, an opportunity fading, or a conversation coming to an end. And although it is false, it hijacks the brain's panic circuit as if it were real. Because when people think the clock is ticking, they stop thinking clearly. This trick plays on the principle of scarcity, the idea that something becomes more valuable the moment it is perceived as limited. But here it is not about limited resources. It's about limited time. I only have a minute, but we can talk later. I have to go. I don't know if I'll have another chance to ask you this. These phrases awaken urgency. They tell the subconscious, decide now, speak now, given now, or you will lose the opportunity forever. It works because urgency eliminates reflection. People become reactive. They say yes before they are ready. They reveal more than they intended. They accept conditions that they would have questioned if they had had time. And the great thing about the false time limit is that it never seems forced. It's casual, rushed. I just wanted to say one quick thing, but it's always enough to push someone to the brink of indecision. Manipulators use this to speed up decisions, close emotional gaps, or circumvent resistance. It is effective in discussions, seduction, sales, and persuasion. The person who receives it often doesn't even realize they've been rushed until much later, when clarity returns and regret appears. The most dangerous thing once urgency takes over is that the emotional mind takes control, logic fades, boundaries blur, and in that last instant, people do not think about what is right. They think about what they are not going to lose. The common enemy trick. The common enemy trick is a psychological bonding tactic that forges an instant connection by uniting people against a common outsider. It works because human beings are tribal by nature. Nothing unites people more than a mutual threat. Agreement can create friendship, but shared resentment creates loyalty. When someone sees that you don't like the same thing as them, they instinctively feel safer by your side. More open, more aligned. You become part of their tribe not because you share their values, but because you share their opposition. This tactic is often used in manipulation, politics, cult psychology, and toxic relationships, rather than building trust little by little through honesty or vulnerability. The manipulator accelerates intimacy by targeting something or someone else. I can't stand how fake they are. Do you know what happens to people like that? These phrases indicate alliance through negativity. The other person feels validated in their judgment, and suddenly, trust is built on the ashes of another person's reputation. It doesn't even matter if the enemy is real. It could be an ex, a boss, a coworker, a celebrity, a social group, or an idea. What matters is that the target joins you through the rejection of something else. This bypasses rational evaluation. You are not judged on your merits. They welcome you as an ally in war, even if only verbal, and that bond becomes emotional cement. The danger is in how fast it works. People mistake shared negativity for connection. They open up quickly, defend themselves quickly, they align emotionally, all because they feel understood. But the truth is they do not feel understood. They feel supported instead. And when that bond is built on contempt, the relationship established often becomes as corrosive as the enemy it replaced. Framed weakness. Framed weakness is the deliberate exposure of a defect, error, or insecurity, presented in a way that increases power rather than diminishing it. It looks like honesty. It sounds like humility, but beneath the surface, it's a strategy. Because when someone chooses how to show weakness, they control how others respond. And when weakness is framed correctly, it does not invite judgment. It gains trust, lowers defenses, and often inspires unexpected respect. This tactic works because human beings are programmed to distrust perfection. People who seem flawless arouse suspicion, envy, or distance. But someone who shows just the right amount of vulnerability, especially when carefully chosen, seems real, reliable, and safe. I have struggled with this before. It has not always been easy for me. I know I'm not the best at it. These statements reduce emotional resistance. They invite connection. But what makes it well-framed is that the revealed weakness is almost always one that makes the one who admits it look better. It is the trick of job interviews. My biggest flaw is that I work too much. It is the confession of influencers. I used to doubt myself, but look where I am now. It is the trap of the manipulator. I have been hurt in the past, so I do not trust easily. The message is not about being weak. It is about being safe, identifiable, or above weakness because it is now under control. Expert users of this technique use it as a weapon in negotiations, leadership, dating, and even manipulation. Because the moment you frame a weakness yourself, you take away its power from being used against you. You make it yours, you mold it, you control it. And by revealing it on your own terms, you place yourself in a superior emotional position, while the other person leans in thinking they have seen your true self, without realizing they have only seen what you wanted them to see. Unexpected gratitude. Unexpected gratitude is a psychological tactic that turns tension into conformity by offering gratitude before it's earned. It is the art of thanking someone, not after they have helped you, but just before, framing the result as if it was already decided. This simple gesture avoids resistance by triggering a deep subconscious need to remain consistent with the image that has just been given. The moment someone hears, "Thank you for doing this," their brain goes from choice to expectation. And that expectation becomes pressure. People want to live up to the image that others have of them, especially when that image is generous, helpful, or kind. When you give thanks before someone accepts, you're subtly handing them that identity. You're not asking, you are assuming, and the assumption becomes a psychological script they feel compelled to follow. Saying no now feels like breaking character, rejecting not only the request, but the version of themselves that they have just fit into. This trick is used by expert persuaders, salespeople, passive-aggressive manipulators, and even emotional abusers. It is disarming because it is clothed in courtesy as if it were armor. The phrase sounds warm, even respectful, but beneath the surface, it robs the other person of all freedom of choice. They're no longer deciding whether to offer help. They're deciding whether to contradict the image that you have already painted of them, kind and reliable people. It works in relationships, in the dynamics of the workplace, in negotiations, and in subtle power games. And the effect is stronger when gratitude seems genuine. The trick lies not in strength, but in charm. Turn pressure into flattery. And once someone is thanked, they're already halfway to acceptance, whether they realize it or not. Because nobody wants to feel like the villain in someone's story, and even less so after having been chosen as the hero. The deceptive compliment. The deceptive compliment is a subtle psychological trick that flatters someone, not to elevate them, but to divert their attention from what really matters. It is not just praise, it is a distraction wrapped in charm. This tactic gives just enough validation to disarm the other person, while silently diverting the conversation, suspicion, or emotion elsewhere. It works because people rarely question flattery when it rings true. At first glance, it sounds sincere. You are very intelligent. I am surprised that you asked that. I admire your calm. Even now, you're always good at reading people. But beneath the surface, it does something else. It is planting a frame, suggesting a truth, diverting attention from the deeper problem, the hidden motive, or the real threat. The compliment becomes a camouflage, one that makes the one who says it seem kind while manipulating perception. This trick is especially effective during high-stakes conversations. When tension rises, a well-placed compliment blurs resistance. It softens suspicion. It makes the recipient feel seen, understood, even admired just before being pushed to accept, deceived by false security, or emotionally overcome. The mind, caught in the glow of approval, forgets to ask the right questions. Manipulators use this to redirect attention. Leaders use it to reframe criticisms. Seducers use it to make closeness perceived as a choice rather than manipulation. The most dangerous thing is how good it feels to receive. People want to believe compliments. It lowers one's guard when praised, especially if the praise touches something one secretly wants to be true. The deceptive compliment does not shout. It smiles. It flatters. It gives just enough to earn trust, while keeping the true intention hidden in plain sight. Because when someone feels admired, they rarely look behind the curtain to see why. The triangulation frame. The triangulation frame is a psychological manipulation technique that controls perception by introducing a third party, real or imaginary, into the dynamic. Instead of getting involved directly, the manipulator diverts attention by referring to what another person thinks, feels, or expects. It is a distraction tactic disguised as perspective. And it works because human beings instinctively submit to consensus, social comparison, and external validation. When a third voice enters the room, even invisibly, the balance of power tilts. Instead of saying, "I think you are wrong," the manipulator says, "Even Sarah thought it was a bit reckless." Instead of confessing an opinion, they present it as universal truth. Most people would agree that this is not right. This triangulation not only softens the confrontation, it adds weight too. Suddenly, it is no longer the belief of a single person. It is that of the group, that of the expert, that of the world. And that imaginary agreement makes it harder to reject, because rejecting it is like rejecting reality. In toxic relationships, triangulation is used to foster insecurity and competition. One of the members of the couple might say, "My ex never had this problem," or "Everyone thinks I'm generous." They are not merely affirmations. They are psychological wedges. They force the listener to question themselves, to compare himself, to compete, or to seek approval. And while they are busy doing that, the manipulator remains untouchable, hidden behind the mask of another person's opinion. The framework of triangulation is subtle and sinister. It allows the speaker to challenge, manipulate, or shame without direct confrontation. And since the third party is not present to be questioned, their supposed opinion becomes unquestionable. That distance creates power because now the listener is facing more than a conversation. He is facing a narrative, one that he has not written, from which he cannot escape, one in which another person's voice is always louder than his own. The labeling effect. The labeling effect is silent manipulation that turns words into identities. It is the moment in which someone is not only told what they have done, but what they are. And the moment that label is stuck, it shapes behavior, decisions, and even self-esteem. You are very reliable. You have always been the difficult one. You are a born leader. They're not just observations. They are definitions. And once pronounced, they resonate in the person who hears them. What makes this powerful is that human beings desperately want to be consistent with the way they are perceived, especially by the people they care about or fear. If someone is labeled as generous, they're more likely to be generous. If someone is called lazy, they are more likely to stop trying. The label becomes a mirror. They begin to live up to it or fall short of it. It doesn't matter if the label is true. What matters is that it has been said aloud and is believed. Expert influencers use this to shape people without ever forcing them. Instead of saying, "Can you be honest with me?" they say, "I know you are someone who always tells truth." The brain responds by becoming the role that has been assigned to it. It does not want to betray the identity that has been assigned to it, even if it has never chosen it. This tactic is used by parents as well as lovers, bosses, and manipulators. It can elevate or destroy. A child who is told that he is brilliant can strive to live up to that image. A partner who is constantly called selfish may end up believing it. And once someone accepts a label, they begin to modify themselves to fit it, filtering their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions through the prism of what they have been told they are. The effect of the label does not directly control behavior. It controls identity. And identity controls everything. The trigger of projection. The trigger of the projection is a psychological tactic that makes someone unknowingly reveal their inner fears, desires, or insecurities by provoking them with vague or indirect statements. It works by creating emotional ambiguity, just enough tension for the mind to strive to find meaning. And in that effort, the person begins to project their inner world outward, thinking that they are describing you when they are exposing themselves. Human beings hate the unknown. When someone hears something unclear, like it's interesting how you responded to that, or there are people who can't stand this kind of pressure, their brain rushes to interpret it. But that interpretation isn't neutral. It is shaped by emotions, past traumas, hidden guilt, and buried desires. And in trying to make sense of the comment, the person ends up revealing more about themselves than they think. What do you mean by that? It becomes a window. What they defend reveals what they fear. What they accuse reveals what they hide. This tactic is used by therapists, interrogators, manipulators, and narcissists alike. It is a way of extracting the truth from someone without ever asking them a direct question. A carefully placed phrase, spoken with calm and detachment, becomes a mirror, and the other person fills it with everything they have been trying to repress. The more defensive they become, the clearer the projection becomes. It's not about what you said, but what they assumed that you meant. The trigger for projection is most powerful when you remain neutral. The less emotion you show, the more their own emotions will burst in to fill that space. It is not necessary to accuse. It is not necessary to confront. You just have to drop the phrase and wait. Because in their reaction, not their words, lies the truth. The truth they think they are hiding. The truth they end up revealing to you unintentionally. Deliberate discomfort. Deliberate discomfort is the calculated use of tension to assert control, reveal truth, or force vulnerability without raising your voice or demanding anything. It's not about cruelty. It's about precision, creating just the right unease in a moment, a silence, a look, or an environment in which the other person feels exposed, uneasy, or strangely compelled to move, to speak, to confess, to obey. This tactic works because human beings are programmed to avoid discomfort, emotional discomfort, social tension, silence that lasts a second longer than it should. All of this is perceived as pressure, and pressure demands release. The person who applies deliberate discomfort knows this. Remove the cushions. Do not soften their words. Do not smile to ease silence. Let remain. And the other person begins to squirm emotionally, physically, and verbally. Discomfort can be subtle. A pause after someone shares something vulnerable. A blank face after hearing a compliment. A room that is too quiet during a negotiation. Or even a repeated question, more slowly and without expression. Why'd you do that? Not shouted, just maintained. The mind panics in that pause, rushing to fill it with justifications or surrender. Expert interrogators use this to uncover lies. Therapists use it to bring hidden truths to light. Manipulators use it to subdue people without pressuring them at all. Discomfort is not perceived as manipulation. It is perceived as gravity. Heavy, inescapable, real. The most disturbing thing is that it works best when combined with calm. Without aggression, without chaos, only a constant presence that refuses to soften the moment. And in a world trained to hurry, explain, and make things comfortable, whoever can deny comfort becomes the one with the most power. Because people are capable of doing almost anything to escape discomfort, even if that means surrendering truth, control, or parts of themselves just to make it stop. The selective revelation. Selective disclosure is a psychological tactic that builds trust and attracts people by revealing just enough personal information to provoke vulnerability without ever losing control. It creates the illusion of intimacy, even though whoever shares the information has all the power. By offering a carefully chosen story, flaw, or emotional detail, the speaker conveys openness, honesty, and depth. But what is revealed is never random. It is calculated. It is bait. Human beings are programmed for reciprocity. When someone shares something that seems private, the automatic response is to mirror that vulnerability. People open up more. Defenses go down. Bonds are created quickly. But selective disclosure turns that mirroring into a tool. The story may sound raw. I have always struggled with the feeling of not being good enough, but it is conveyed with timing, control, and purpose. The message is not help me, it is trust me, and most people do so without hesitation. This tactic is used by expert manipulators, emotional scammers, politicians, and sometimes even well-meaning leaders. Revelation creates emotional closeness, and in that closeness, people reveal much more than they planned. They share secrets. They lower their guard. They become loyal to someone who has never really let them in. Because, while the listener was revealing the truth, the speaker was revealing a story, one that he has probably told dozens of times before. The trick lies in what is not shared. The most dangerous people will give you only the truth necessary to make them seem real to you, but they will keep their true vulnerabilities under lock and key. You will leave thinking that you have seen them, but what you have seen is a mask made of confessions, a controlled glimpse, a rehearsed scar, and when you realize how little you really know, they will already know everything about you. The effect of the last word. The effect of a last word is the psychological footprint left by a conversation's final sentence. An echo that lingers long after the dialogue has ended, shaping memory, emotion, and perception. It's not just about winning an argument or having the last word. It's about controlling the aftertaste of the interaction. Because what is said at the end is often what is remembered first. The human brain assigns disproportionate weight to what it hears at the end. It's called the recency effect, and it's built into memory. In discussions, negotiations, or even emotional conversations, the last word becomes a seal that marks how the other person feels as they leave. A soft apology, a passive-aggressive blow, a sudden truth, even a whispered compliment. Whatever form it takes, the last word has the power to change the entire meaning of the exchange. Expert communicators use this deliberately. They let others speak, they let emotions unleash, they let the moment intensify, and then they release a single phrase that reframes everything. It's okay, but don't expect me to forget it. Say what you want, but deep down you know I'm right. I hope you see it clearly someday. They're not just phrases. They are psychological anchors. They are nailed. They are repeated. They imbue with meaning the silence that follows them. Even in relationships, the last word can determine who has emotional control. A kind word after a fight, a meaningful silence after a plea, a truth calmly told just before the door closes. It is not about the volume, but the moment. The last word is a silent form of dominance, not always in the tone, but in the lasting influence, because people rarely remember the entire conversation, but always remember how it ended. And that ending, however brief, can haunt, comfort, or control everything that comes after. The illusion of self-reference. The illusion of self-reference is a psychological phenomenon that deceives the brain by making it believe a vague message is exclusively personal. Even when designed to apply to almost anyone, it plays with the human tendency to look for meaning, especially when the message seems mysterious, emotional, and open. When people hear a statement like, "You have been hiding something important," they instinctively turn inward, not outward, trying to relate it to their own story. And once the brain starts looking for matches, it finds them, even if they never existed. This illusion is why horoscopes seem accurate. That is why personality tests seem so accurate. That is why cold readers and manipulators can get into people's heads without knowing anything about them. The message is vague enough to be universal, but conveyed with such confidence and at the right time that it seems directed at you. The listener does not realize how general it is. He only feels seen, understood, exposed, and that feeling opens the emotional floodgates. Expert communicators use this in interviews, seduction, political speeches, sex recruitment, and psychological manipulation. They say things like, "You act strong, but deep down you feel misunderstood." Or, "There is something that you are afraid to admit, even to yourself." They are not revelations. They are emotional hooks. And the moment the person identifies with them, they begin to provide details. Filling gaps. She builds the illusion herself and becomes loyal to the person who understood her. The illusion of self-reference is dangerous because it not only manipulates logic, it manipulates identity. People confuse coincidence with connection, and that perceived connection creates trust. But trust has not been earned. It has been manufactured by a message vague enough to apply to everyone and conveyed with just enough mystery to make it seem like destiny. The evasion of apology. The evasion of apology is the art of appearing responsible while skillfully avoiding responsibility. It is the type of apology that seems real on the surface, but deep down is a shield, a detour, a gentle manipulation that protects the ego while disarming the other person. It does not say, "I was wrong." It says, "I'm sorry you feel that way." And with that simple twist, the focus shifts from the action to the reaction, from guilt to misunderstanding. This trick works because most people are programmed to hear the words, "I'm sorry," and immediately lower their guard. The brain registers it as a sign of remorse. But in a deflected apology, the remorse is not for the damage caused. It is for the discomfort caused by the other person's feelings. "I am sorry you are upset. It was never my intention to hurt you. But I'm sorry you took it that way." These phrases seem gentle, even generous, but they have a sharp edge. They invalidate the pain by removing the offender from the center of damage. The deflection of apology is often used by people who want to maintain control over the emotional narrative. It confuses the other person and leads them to question their reaction. It makes them feel irrational, too sensitive, or even guilty for feeling hurt. And as it sounds like an apology, pointing it out seems petty, but it leaves a residue, an emotional sensation that something has not been fully acknowledged. Expert manipulators use it to end conflicts without truly resolving them. Leaders use it to evade guilt and to appear elegant. Even friends and couples use it, consciously or unconsciously, to avoid feeling uncomfortable when taking real responsibility. The genius of apology evasion is not that it denies the problem. It is that it pretends to care enough to end the conversation. The question, "Have you ever?" The question, "Have you ever?" is a psychological door that bypasses defenses and sneaks into the truth by asking hypothetical questions instead of direct ones. It seems casual, harmless, just a gentle brush on a topic that someone might resist. But behind that soft tone hides a very sharp tactic. Because when a question is wrapped in a "would you ever do?" the brain does not respond cautiously. It responds with imagination, and that imagination reveals everything. If you ask someone, "Why did you do that?" they become defensive. They protect themselves. But if you ask them, "Would you ever do something like that?" suddenly their mind begins to explore possibilities without realizing that it is being interrogated. It begins to speak in hypothetical terms. "Well, I guess it would depend," or "maybe if I had to." And within those vague answers hide real beliefs, buried emotions, hidden intentions. They say it as if it were fiction, but it is not. It is a confession in disguise. Manipulators, interrogators, psychologists, and even seducers use this question to explore someone's inner world without arousing suspicion. It is not perceived as pressure. It is perceived as curiosity, as a game. But it works because the emotional mind responds faster than logic. And when people speak from imagination, they often reveal truths they have never admitted, not even to themselves. The question, "Have you ever?" is powerful in its subtlety. It sounds like a game, but it extracts real information. It does not demand honesty. It deceives the mind into revealing it voluntarily. And when the person realizes what they have revealed, the conversation has already moved on and the truth has already come to light, hidden behind a small, harmless question that they thought was safe to answer. The inversion of pause. The inversion of the pause is a subtle conversational trap in which silence, instead of being used to absorb pressure, is used to create it and then return to the other person. It is a technique based on tension, control, and psychological timing. In a world where people rush to fill the silence, whoever knows how to pause and wait longer than expected is the one who controls the pace of the conversation. But the inversion occurs in what comes next. This is how it works. Someone asks a tricky question, states something daring, or transmits a great emotional charge. The atmosphere becomes tense. Instead of reacting, the other person simply pauses, not out of surprise or confusion, but because they are in total control. The pause lengthens. It becomes uncomfortable. The interlocutor begins to doubt themselves. They begin to back down, to give explanations, to soften their tone. And just when they think they have filled the silence, the inversion occurs. With quiet precision, the one who has maintained the pause responds, not emotionally, but surgically. It is interesting that you say that. So, you felt the need to bring that up now. Is it how you really see it, or is it just how you wanted to look? The silence becomes a scalpel. It wasn't empty. It was loading, and the delayed response now hits harder than anything immediate. The inversion of pause disorients because it breaks the script. People expect silence as a sign of submission, discomfort, or hesitation. But when it becomes a cold, serene counterattack, it shocks the system. It turns the emotional dynamic upside down. The person who thought they were in control suddenly sees themselves falling apart, reacting to a response that took time and hit the mark. In that pause, power was not lost. It was being sharpened. The sudden withdrawal. The sudden withdrawal is a psychological tactic that creates power by withdrawing at the moment someone begins to depend on your presence, attention, or validation. It is not gradual. It is abrupt, clean, immediate. One day, the energy flows. Messages, attention, approval, warmth, and the next day, it disappears. That disappearance causes confusion, panic, and obsession, because the human brain does not fear rejection as much as interruption. And sudden silence feels like a punishment wrapped in mystery. People not only miss the person, they miss the pattern, the rhythm. When someone who once made them feel seen, loved, or important suddenly disappears, emotional estrangement feels like a loss of identity. The mind begins to rewind every moment. Did I say something wrong? Did I do something? What happened? And in that mental spiral, they begin to chase the person who walked away, not out of love, but out of a need for resolution. This technique is used by narcissists, emotional manipulators, and toxic lovers to create control. They give enough to hook someone and then disappear. And when they return days or weeks later, the person has softened, become destabilized, and is more willing to accept conditions that they would have rejected before. Because the silence has not only hurt, but has trained them. It has created an emotional addiction in which absence becomes stronger than presence. Sudden withdrawal works because it creates a void, and nature abhors a void. The abandoned person rushes to fill it with apologies, excessive explanations, persecution, or surrender. But what they don't realize is that the withdrawal wasn't emotional distance. It was dominance, a silent way of saying, I control when you feel complete and when you fall apart. The game of divided attention. The game of divided attention is a psychological smokescreen, an intentional interruption of someone's concentration to make them more vulnerable, more compliant, or less aware of what is really happening. It works by dividing the mind in two directions at once, creating cognitive overload in which resistance weakens and critical thinking fades. And the person being manipulated rarely realizes it because their brain is too busy trying to keep up. In essence, this tactic uses distraction as manipulation. A question is asked while handing over a document. A compliment is given while a difficult topic is casually introduced. A story is told while requesting a decision. It is not chaotic. It is calculated. The listener's attention is scattered. Their emotional and logical systems struggle to keep up. And in that moment of overstimulation, they let down their guard. This technique is especially effective when emotion and logic collide, while someone reacts emotionally, laughs, vents, or blushes. It is more probable that they will accept something that they would have doubted in silence. It is very easy to talk with you. By the way, can I sleep at your house tonight? The emotional thread creates warmth, but the hidden petition sneaks in while the conscious mind still digests the compliment. They say yes and only later wonder why. The game of divided attention thrives in negotiations, seductions, sales pitches, and even discussions. It is not about a lie. It is about creating layers of meaning, making the other person juggle emotions, data, body language, and social pressure all at once, until their ability to defend themselves is exhausted completely. Because when the brain is divided, it takes mental shortcuts. By default, it says yes automatically. Choose ease instead of clarity always. And whoever understands this, whoever creates the perfect moment, can guide the other person wherever they want without seeming to direct them. The recoil test itself. The recoil test is a psychological probe that reveals hidden guilt, insecurity, or emotional vulnerability by introducing an unexpected comment and observing their immediate physical or emotional reaction. It is not about what someone says exactly. It is about how quickly their body betrays them before their words can reach them. The eyes widen, posture changes, breathing stops, and in that flash of instinct, the truth filters through. Because recoiling isn't a choice. It is a confession written as reflection. This technique is often used by interrogators, manipulators, or emotionally strategic people who deeply understand one thing. People lie with words, but their nervous system never lies. A sudden mention of any topic. It is curious how much your story changes or what really happened that night. Actually, it does not have to be factual. It only has to seem that way. The target's body will say all the rest. A shudder can be quite subtle. A blink, a hesitation, a second of silence in which the mind recovers from surprise. And it tells you exactly where the wound is, exactly where to press next time. Because once you have found what makes someone flinch, you have found a gateway to control them. Whether you move forward or backward, the power is yours now. The flinch test is dangerous because it does not directly confront. Observe carefully. Let the other person expose themselves while they think they are still in control. And by the time they recover their mask, the damage has been done. You have seen their weakness. You have felt that tremor. You have seen the moment when their truth tried to escape and did not arrive on time. The fall of social proof. The fall of social proof is the silent mention of a name, the insertion of a story, or a casual mention that instantly changes perception, not by force, but by association alone. It is the psychological trick of borrowing the credibility, value, or attractiveness of others and then letting it spill over yourself without asking for permission. It is subtle, strategic, and far more persuasive than a direct assertion of authority, because it does not sound like persuasion at all. Really, this is simply how it works. Someone slips a detail into their conversation. I was talking to one client who works at Google. When I was invited to that private event, I discovered that during a workshop with some Fortune 500 executives, these statements do not refer to the story itself. They refer to who was there, where it happened, and who actually participated. The names, the places, and even the titles do the heavy lifting now. The speaker never directly says, "I am important." It simply implies it through context alone. This tactic activates the brain's natural instinct to follow the crowd, or, more precisely, to trust what the crowd did. If others trust, respect, or follow someone, we instinctively believe we should too. It is evolutionary. Safety once depended on not being the oddball. Therefore, when someone is associated with status, success, or credibility, even subtly, it alters how we perceive them. Their opinions carry more weight now. Their requests seem more valid. Their presence is perceived as valuable. Manipulators use this to inflate status. Sellers use it to boost sales. Seducers use it to create mystery. The genius of social proof is that it need not be verified. The mere suggestion of aligning with authority or popularity is enough to reconfigure perception. And the listener, who wants to stay aligned with what is admired, often leans in, trusting not in the speaker's words, but in the echoes of the reputation that so easily bring in the room. The whisper effect. The whisper effect is a psychological trigger that reverses the balance of power by lowering the voice instead of raising it. It does not work by demanding attention, but by drawing it towards you. When someone lowers the volume, especially in a moment charged with emotion, the expected rhythm breaks. Tension is created. It forces the other person to lean forward. And in that inclination, both physical and psychological, a shift occurs. The speaker becomes the center of gravity. People expect high volume as a sign of strength. They associate volume with authority. But when someone whispers or speaks softly with intention, the brain interprets that differently. It is perceived as something secret, intimate, serious. It activates a different kind of concentration. Suddenly, every word seems important. Each pause seems deliberate. The listener stops reacting and begins absorbing. He becomes hyper-conscious, drawn to silence like a moth to light. Manipulators, interrogators, and powerful speakers use this effect to create emotional contrast. After tension or conflict, a whisper is perceived as resolution, even if it is not. It calms, intrigues, unsettles, because whispers not only change the volume of a conversation, but also change the rules. And in that change, people become more docile, more receptive, more vulnerable. The whisper effect also appeals to a primary instinct. When someone lowers their voice, it is often a sign of danger, urgency, or truth. It bypasses logic and goes directly to the limbic system. The listener not only hears the words, but feels them. And the person who whispers is not perceived as weak. She is seen as controlled, self-assured, and terribly convinced, because anyone can shout to be heard. But when someone makes you chase their voice, you follow them, even if you don't know why. The reverse question. The reverse question is the psychological pivot that turns certainty to doubt. It is not about directly challenging someone, but about shifting the perspective in a way that they are not prepared for. It is not a confrontation, but a disturbance. It forces the mind to stop, reorient, and reconsider everything it thought solid. Not saying you're wrong, but asking, what if it was the other way around? This tactic works because most people build their opinions like walls, brick by brick, belief by belief, stacked over time, without ever testing their foundations. The reverse question sneaks under that wall and shakes it below. What if you're not a victim? What if doing nothing is actually the riskiest choice? What if this is not happening to you, but it is your fault? These are not answers. They are mental grenades. They are powerful because they invite, they do not attack. They do not provoke a defense. They provoke reflection. The mind shaken by the inversion must simulate an inverted scenario. And in doing so, cracks begin appearing. The ego does not feel attacked. It feels confused. And confusion, when conveyed with calm precision, is one of the most fertile states for influence. The reverse question is used by philosophers to expose illusions, by therapists to unlock repressed patterns, and by manipulators to destabilize identity. It seems harmless, even thoughtful, but it reconfigures conversation in seconds. Because once someone considers the opposite of what they believe, they can never see that belief the same way again. The moment the inversion occurs, the listener becomes insecure. And in that uncertainty, the speaker, calm, serene, curious, suddenly becomes the one who seems to know more. Because in a room full of people defending themselves, the one who asks the right question does not need to raise their voice to change the outcome. Random praise. Random praise is a psychological tactic that creates a profound emotional impact by offering unexpected, specific compliments at times when they are least expected. It is not about flattering. It is about surprising. When someone receives praise in a neutral or even negative moment, this praise bypasses their defenses and goes straight to their emotional core. The brain is trained to expect compliments. At peak moments, after a success, a kind gesture, or an effort. But when praise comes from nowhere, it feels real. It feels sincere, and it stays engraved. The most powerful compliments are not those that are said aloud or publicly. They are precise, discreet, almost casual, like saying, "By the way, I have always admired your ability to remain calm under pressure during a normal conversation, or there are not many people as attentive as you when we walk to the car." These comments impact more than direct praise because they have not been earned at that moment. They are perceived as a discovery, and that sensation creates emotional weight. This tactic is used by expert persuaders, mentors, leaders, and, yes, manipulators because it quickly generates loyalty. It creates an emotional debt. It makes the receiver feel understood in a world where most people are too distracted to notice anything deeper. And once someone believes that you see something in them that others do not, they begin to associate your presence with value, validation, and warmth. But the effect is not only emotional, it is behavioral. People start to live up to the praise they have received. A single sentence said at the right time can shape one's identity, not because words are powerful, but because they arrive without warning. When the barriers are down, when the mind is unprepared, when, for a moment, they feel that someone has seen a part of them that they did not even know existed. The disarming smile. The disarming smile is the gentlest and most effective way to unbalance someone. It is the calm smile that is drawn at the exact moment when someone expects tension, anger, or resistance. It confuses emotional rhythm. It makes aggressiveness uncomfortable. It turns power games into hesitation. And with just a glance, you can steal the emotional advantage without saying a word. This tactic works because people are conditioned to match emotional tones. When someone comes in with tension, they expect tension in return. If they raise their voice, they expect to be answered with the same intensity. If they try to intimidate, they expect fear or defensiveness. But when the other person responds, not with resistance, but with a calm and complicit smile, the emotional script is altered. Suddenly, the aggressor feels insecure. Why is he smiling? Does he know something I don't? Aren't they taking me seriously? Or are they stronger than I thought? The smile doesn't have to be friendly. In fact, it often isn't. It is calm, controlled, a sign that says, "I am not afraid of you." And that alone can undo dominance. In a conflict, it neutralizes the fire. In manipulation, it invites excessive confidence. In persuasion, it creates warmth without surrendering. It lowers defenses while maintaining control. The disarming smile is especially powerful in public settings, tense meetings, or face-to-face confrontations. The moment tension rises, a smile at the right moment changes the atmosphere. Not because it lightens things up, but because it makes the other person question their approach. They expected a wall. They encountered water. And now they have to wonder what is behind that stillness. Because the person who smiles in the face of pressure does not only seem unperturbed, they seem untouchable. The conditional commitment. Conditional commitment is a psychological technique that traps agreement by offering a deal that seems fair, but secretly transfers all power to the person proposing it. It starts with a simple phrase. "If I do this for you, will you do this for me?" It sounds reciprocal. It sounds balanced. But under that surface of cooperation hides a control mechanism. Because once someone says yes, they have made a verbal contract. And the human brain hates breaking promises. This tactic works because people want to appear consistent. When they accept a condition, even hypothetically, they feel pressure to fulfill it, especially if the other person fulfills it first. The moment someone says, "Of course, if you help me with this, I will support you," they have tied themselves to your action. And when you comply, they are now socially, emotionally, and psychologically obligated to fulfill their part, even if they no longer want to. Even if now the deal seems unequal to them. Manipulators and persuaders use this technique to create an emotional debt without appearing demanding. It is not perceived as an imposition. It sounds like something fair. But what makes it powerful is the sequence. You act first. You give the help, the favor, the time. And when you do, the pressure shifts to them. Now they owe you something, not for morality, but because of their own words. The conditional commitment doesn't have to be formal. It is not necessary for it to be written. You just have to listen for it. And once it is said aloud, it becomes a psychological chain. It can be broken, yes, but only with discomfort, guilt, and internal friction. And most people will do anything to avoid feeling like someone who has not kept their word, even if it means doing something they never intended to do at all. The memory hook. The memory hook is the subtle implantation of an idea, a phrase, or an emotion in such a vivid way that it remains engraved in someone's mind, repeating itself over and over long after the conversation has ended. It is not about repeating only facts. It is about creating a moment that sticks in your mind like a splinter. A phrase, a gesture, a perfectly timed word that keeps resonating in the silence when there is no one else around. This is how you make a dent in someone's memory without forcing your way in. This trick works because the brain does not retain everything. It retains what it feels deeply. The memory hook is attached to emotion, surprise, vulnerability, or contradiction. We always look away when it's important. That silence said more than your answer ever could. Just remember who stayed when everyone had left. They are not mere affirmations. They are mental anchors. The kind of things people remember when they are alone, try to decide what was lost, why it still hurts, or why it suddenly makes sense. The memory hook is usually quite brief. It does not give many explanations. That is what gives the hook power. The brain repeats unresolved things often. It wants to close that cycle. A forceful phrase said at the right time creates psychological unease, one that demands resolution. And while the conscious mind tries to move on, the subconscious keeps repeating the moment, trying to resolve it and make peace with it. This technique is used by storytellers, seducers, therapists, manipulators, and even leaders. A phrase can be repeated for days, not because it was strong, but because it was surgical, because it eluded defenses and hit directly where it wasn't expected. The memory hook doesn't control the moment. It controls the subsequent moments. It is the ghost of the conversation, the part that remains after everything else has already been silenced. The strategic delay. The strategic delay is a psychological maneuver that creates tension, perceived value, and control by not responding immediately. Whether it is a message read and unanswered, a proposal that is received with silence, or a decision postponed without explanation, this tactic turns waiting into a weapon and sends a clear, albeit tacit, signal. I follow my rhythm, not yours. And that delay turns an ordinary interaction into emotional chess in which every second of silence makes the other person more invested. Human beings long for an answer when we ask a question, extend an invitation, or take a vulnerable step. We expect a quick response. But when that answer doesn't come, the brain spirals. Have I done something wrong? Are they still thinking? Have they already moved on? Uncertainty becomes a hook, and with each passing minute, the person on the other side begins to chase, not out of desire, but out of emotional discomfort. This tactic is used in business, dating, manipulation, and negotiations. The job offer that takes days seems more valuable now. The person who waits hours before responding to a message feels more independent and powerful. The longer the silence lasts, the more importance we give the person who maintains it. We tell each other stories to fill a void, and those stories often elevate those who keep silent. But the true genius of strategic delay is that it achieves everything by doing nothing. It forces the other person to wait, worry, and desire. And when the answer finally arrives, if it arrives at all, it carries more weight than if it had been sent immediately, because now it feels deserved. Not because it is reflective, but because silence has made them believe it is more important than it really is. The unexpected twist. The unexpected twist is a psychological ambush that changes the emotional tone of a conversation in an instant, catching the other person off guard and taking control. It is the sharp turn that turns vulnerability into dominance, kindness into confrontation, or submission into clarity. The power does not reside in the content of what is said, but in how and when it is said. Deliver it just as the other person believes they have figured you out. Human beings are programmed to anticipate patterns. Once a tone is established, soft, apologetic, passive, the brain relaxes and begins to predict the next movements. But when that pattern is broken with a clean emotional shift, confusion, intensity, and a sudden alert are triggered. I am very sorry for everything I did, but perhaps the worst thing is that I was apologizing to someone who never deserved my apology. That change is the twist. Regain power in real time. The inversion is so effective because it takes advantage of contrast, a sudden change from calm to audacity, from softness to hardness, from agreement to challenge. It creates an emotional shock. The other person struggles to recover, often revealing more than they intended, just to try and regain balance. And whoever has given the twist now controls the emotional landscape. Manipulators use it to destabilize. Leaders use it to reframe things. Lovers use it to regain the upper hand after showing themselves vulnerable. But it only works when it's earned. When the other person has lowered their guard, expecting one version of you, and suddenly encounters another. It is not erratic nor out of control. It is just different. The unexpected twist is not about contradiction, but timing. It is a sudden turn of the steering wheel while the other person is still looking in their rearview mirror. And when it is done well, it leaves them spinning while you drive the conversation where you want it to go. The tactical retreat. The tactical retreat is a psychological strategy that gains power by taking a step back, not as surrender, but as calculation. It is the act of withdrawing from a conversation, discussion, or opportunity at the precise moment when emotions are running high or control is being lost. In appearance, it looks like resignation. But deep down, there's something colder, smarter, more restrained. Because whoever knows when to withdraw instead of insisting is often the one who returns with an advantage. Most people struggle to win in the moment. They insist, argue, pursue validation, and try to dominate any conversation. But the tactical retreat breaks this pattern. It leaves the other person alone with their words, their anger, and their assumptions. And in that silence, something begins changing. They begin to doubt themselves. Their emotions deflate. Their need for resolution grows. Suddenly, it is no longer you who is demanding. It is them. This technique is used in power negotiations, psychological warfare, toxic relationships, and high-level manipulation. It does not announce itself. It does not look like a movement, but it is one. Because walking away on your own terms creates tension, and tension creates curiosity. Why do they stop? Why didn't they defend themselves? Have they finished or are they waiting? The mind hates unfinished stories. And that unfinished story becomes a new form of control. The tactical retreat works because it does not satisfy the other person's emotional script. It leaves her in the middle of the scene, still acting for an audience that is no longer there. And in that void, you become the person they think of, who they talk about, who they want to recover, not because you begged them, but because you disappeared at the exact moment they expected you to stay. The deliberate misunderstanding. The deliberate misunderstanding is the psychological tactic of pretending not to understand what someone has clearly said, forcing them to give excessive explanations, to retract or reveal their hidden intentions. It's not about confusion. It's about control. By acting as if you don't understand a comment, a tone, or motive, you subtly return the pressure to the other person, forcing them to adapt while you sit comfortably in your feigned innocence. This trick works because it interrupts the emotional impulse. When someone tries to provoke, accuse, or manipulate, they rely on rhythm, on emotional flow. But when you pause, raise an eyebrow, and say, "Excuse me, what exactly do you mean?" the rhythm breaks. They're forced to reformulate, to clarify, revealing more than they wanted. And the more they talk, the more their position weakens. The more they explain, the more visible their strategy becomes. Deliberate misunderstanding is often used in debates, passive-aggressive conversations, and power games. It sounds harmless. It seems innocent. But deep down, it is a strategic maneuver to buy time, a shield, a noose that slowly closes around the other person's words. It can bring contradictions to light, reframe insults as confusion, or turn ambiguous compliments into uncomfortable personal revelations. "Oh, I thought you meant that as a compliment." "Wait, are you saying you would have done better?" These are not real questions. They are traps. The strength of this tactic lies in that it allows you to remain calm, not react, and even be polite while the other person begins to fall apart. Because the moment they realize that you are not playing the emotional game they expected, they are the ones who start looking for a foothold. And when they realize the trap, they're already entangled in their own words, while you simply smile and ask again, "Could you explain it one more time?" The bluff of excessive confidence. The bluff of excessive confidence is a psychological tactic that uses certainty as a weapon, even when it is not based on anything. It works by issuing statements, decisions, or limits with such resounding confidence that the other person does not question what you say. She questions herself. It is not the facts that matter. It is how absolutely sure you seem. Because in moments of uncertainty, people follow whoever seems most certain, even if that confidence is pure illusion. When someone enters a room and says, "This is how it is going to be," without hesitating, without explaining, without leaving room for debate, the energy changes. The bluff does not have to be based on truth. It just has to seem inevitable. And since most people are programmed to avoid conflict and doubt their instincts under pressure, they end up giving in. They assume you know something they don't, that you have backing, that you've already done this before. The lie becomes credible not because it is logical, but because it is said with conviction. This trick is used by high-level negotiators, narcissists, lawyers, toxic leaders, and charismatic manipulators. They don't wait for permission. They create the frame. They raise the stakes, set the tone, and force others to react. The bluff of excessive confidence has nothing to do with deception. It has to do with dominance. It is the psychological equivalent of acting first and fast, leaving no room for doubt. The danger lies in how easy it is to believe, because confidence is confused with competence. Repetition is confused with proof. And the louder someone claims their certainty, the more people doubt their quieter instinct. But that is the bluff. It is an acting designed to end resistance before it can even begin. And when someone realizes they have been deceived, the game is already over. And the excessively confident liar has already won. The authority frame. The authority frame is the invisible crown worn by those who enter a room and make it their own without asking, without announcing it, and often without even realizing it. It is the psychological positioning of oneself as the last word, the point of reference, the one whose perception determines how everyone else thinks, speaks, and reacts. It is not about having real power. It is about acting as if you have it and watching how others bend to it. This frame begins the moment someone speaks with certainty without apologizing. They do not say, "I think this might work." They say, "This is what we're going to do." They do not ask for permission to lead. They assume that the role has already been granted to them. And most of the time, people follow them not because they have convinced them, but because they have positioned themselves below, behind, or next to whoever first claimed the frame. The authority frame works because people are psychologically attracted to perceiving stability. The person who seems sure of themselves, who does not cower in silence, who does not give explanations unless asked, creates a gravitational force. Their tone becomes the reference. Their emotional state becomes the climate of the group, and others, often unconsciously, begin to imitate it. Expert manipulators use the authority frame to control conversations, negotiations, and even relationships. They decide what matters. They direct attention. Let's not waste time with that. That is not the real problem here. With a few words, they cut through the chaos and reposition the narrative. And the more others comply, the stronger the frame becomes. It is a loop. Assumed power becomes reinforced power. The danger is that it requires no merit, only presence, confidence, and the refusal to give up space. And once someone sets the authority frame, the rest of the room usually forgets that it had the right to question it in the first place. Some call it shield. Some say that the shield is a psychological diversion tactic that allows someone to express bold, controversial, or manipulative opinions without ever taking full responsibility for them. It works by hiding personal beliefs behind the vague authority of an anonymous crowd. Instead of saying, "I think you are wrong," The speaker says, some people might say, that is a bit naive. The message still arrives. The insult still hurts, but it is now more difficult to deal with because it has been disguised as secondhand observation rather than direct accusation. This technique works like armor. It protects the speaker from the consequences while allowing them to introduce their opinion into the conversation. If challenged, they can withdraw instantly. Hey, I'm just saying what I've heard. But if the comment is accepted or one agrees with it, they double down on their bet, gaining influence without defending their position. It is emotional cowardice disguised as objectivity. This is heard in toxic relationships, gossip circles, corporate meetings, and manipulative media. It is a way of planting ideas without assuming responsibility, of criticizing without risk, of shaping conversation without entering it. And the power resides in ambiguity, because it puts the burden of interpretation on the listener. If you are offended, you are too sensitive. If you agree, you have been manipulated. In any case, the one who speaks washes their hands. Some say that the shield manipulates perception by avoiding responsibility. It uses the illusion of consensus to corner the listener, forcing them to accept a statement that cannot be refuted. And when he tries to respond, the speaker has already moved on to something else, leaving behind a seed of doubt that was never his, but that somehow has taken root. The delay tactic. The delay tactic is a maneuver to buy time without appearing to stall. It is the decision not to decide. The quiet abstention from acting pressures another person to reveal more, give more, or collapse under their own urgency. It is not about saying no, it is about saying not yet. And in that pause, everything changes. This tactic works because most people feel uncomfortable with uncertainty. When an answer does not come quickly, when a yes is suspended or a reaction withheld, the other person begins to spin. Did they say something wrong? Are they losing interest? Is the opportunity slipping away? That discomfort grows in silence, and the longer it lasts, the more power tilts towards whoever seems indifferent to the wait. The delay tactic manifests in many ways. The unanswered text message, the "I'll think about it," the long pause after a request, the slow nod instead of immediate acceptance. Each version conveys the same message. I'm not in a hurry, but maybe you are. And that imbalance opens a door. The person waiting begins to give more explanations. Sweetens the offer, softens the tone, tries harder. Negotiators use it to wear down urgency. Manipulators use it to create dependence. Leaders use it to create mystery. Even in relationships, whoever delays a response usually controls the emotional rhythm. Because the mind fears the void. It rushes to fill it even at the cost of its own position. The beauty of the delay tactic is that it never seems aggressive. It does not argue. It does not resist. It simply waits, calm, patient, silent, until the other person can't take it anymore and takes the first step. And in a world obsessed with speed, whoever intentionally delays becomes the one who dictates the outcome. Framing the conflict as confusion. Framing the conflict as confusion is a strategy that eliminates the intensity of confrontation by pretending not to understand instead of opposing. Instead of responding with resistance or emotion, the person disarms their opponent with a calm, disoriented question. I am confused. Why do you say that? Or help me understand what you mean. And just like that, the attacker loses balance. The intensity of the conflict is attenuated with the fog of the supposed misunderstanding. This works because it returns the emotional burden to the other person. Instead of intensifying the discussion, it diverts attention away. Now she is the one who has to explain herself. She has to soften her tone, clarify her words, justify her position. And at that moment, the balance of power shifts. Who seemed passive becomes the one asking questions. Who is aggressive goes on the defensive, explaining instead of attacking. It is a tool widely used by therapists, expert negotiators, passive-aggressive manipulators, and emotionally intelligent people in power. By framing the conflict as confusion, they eliminate all traces of hostility on their part. They seem reasonable, sensible, even generous. But what they are really doing is dodging the emotional blow and forcing the other person to strike again. This time weaker, this time more insecure. The genius of this tactic lies in its invisibility. It does not seem like resistance. It seems like curiosity, but under that soft tone hides a razor. Because when someone frames your anger or your accusation as something confusing, they're silently undermining your credibility. They're suggesting that your position is not only wrong, but irrational. And if you try to intensify the discussion, you only demonstrate that they are right, not because you have lost the fight, but because you have fallen into their trap. The still hand. The immobilization of the hands is a nonverbal gesture that says more than any interruption. It is the sudden stillness of movement, especially of the hands, in the middle of a tense conversation. One moment they're gesticulating, accompanying the flow of words, and the next they stop completely. That pause in movement becomes a psychological wall. The other person perceives it immediately, whether they understand it or not. This tactic works because body language is emotionally contagious. When someone gestures naturally, the conversation is perceived as fluid, open, and safe. But when those hands suddenly become still, suspended in the air, resting coldly on the table, with fingers intertwined by tension, a clear but tacit message is sent. This has just changed, and the person in front of you perceives it. Their rhythm is broken. Their nervous system is alerted. Something is not right, and they begin to look for the reason why. The immobilization of hands is more effective when synchronized with the emotional impact. Right after someone says something disrespectful, right before saying a difficult truth, in the moment between a challenge and a response, the hands become a warning sign. It is not dramatic or theatrical, just still, abnormally still. And in that stillness, the pressure increases. The other person perceives a change of tone without you saying it out loud. Expert communicators use this to regain control during conversation. Manipulators use it to create psychological weight without raising their voice. Interrogators use it to break the flow of lies. Even in personal relationships, freezing the hands at the right moment makes the other person lean towards you or shut up. It is subtle. You are not blocking, you are retaining. And that moderation calls attention. Because when someone who used to move with you suddenly stops, it makes you wonder what has changed. And sometimes, the silence of a still hand can say, I see what you are doing, and I am not going to follow your game anymore. The one-sided smile. The unilateral smile is a psychological weapon disguised as a facial expression. It is the subtle smile that only curves one corner of the mouth and transmits a more powerful message than any word. It is something that you do not know. It is not joy. It is not kindness. It is control. That small asymmetry communicates superiority, condescension, a silent challenge, and sinks in like a quiet insult. The receiver often cannot explain why it hurts them. They simply suddenly feel smaller. Human beings are programmed to read faces. A complete smile transmits warmth, security, connection. But a unilateral smile is ambiguity wrapped in dominion. It confuses the emotional brain. Are they making fun of me? Do they pity me? Are they hiding something? The mind tries to decipher it, but there is no clarity. And in that uncertainty, the power dynamic leans toward who smiled, because they did not give you a reaction to reflect. They gave you a puzzle to solve. This expression is used by manipulators, interrogators, and emotionally abusive personalities who want to provoke without being openly aggressive. It is deniable. If attention is called to them, they can say, I was just smiling. But, it was not just that. The unilateral smile is the mocking smile of someone who has already won, or at least wants you to believe that they have. It is a look into the mind of someone who sees themselves above the game and sees you as if you were still playing. The damage it causes is not evident. It is slow. It makes people question their instincts. They rehearse the moment. They repeat the interaction because, deep down, they felt it. It was not affection, but control. It was not joy, but a silent psychological war. The unilateral smile is not to connect. It is to dominate wrapped in charm. And once it is shown, it lasts longer than any scream. The between you and me is the psychological whisper that opens the door to intimacy, trust, and manipulation, all in one sentence. It is not just a way to start a sentence. It is a narrative resource, a velvet rope that attracts someone to a private corner of the conversation, making them feel chosen, important, and subtly obligated to reciprocate. It is not about what follows the phrase. It is about how it positions the listener. This tactic works because the secret is seductive. When someone hears "between you and me," their posture changes. Their attention sharpens. The brain interprets it as a rupture of normal limits. Something is being shared that should not be shared, which makes it seem more valuable, more real, more true. Whether it is gossip, a confession, or information, the listener leans in physically and emotionally. And in that inclination, their critical thinking softens. However, the real trick is in the illusion of trust. The phrase implies vulnerability, but it is often prepared. It is used to plant ideas, shape perceptions, or extract information under the pretext of mutual trust. Between you and me, I do not think she is qualified. Between you and me, he is not going to last long here. These are not just opinions. They are invitations to agree, to align, to join a silent alliance. Manipulators use this to create false intimacy. Sellers use it to make offers seem exclusive. Politicians use it to connect with the masses, pretending to take them behind the scenes. And once someone believes that something private has been revealed to them, they're more likely to defend it, repeat it, or return the favor without realizing that they have just been recruited for someone else's narrative. Because once someone believes that the truth is being whispered only to him, he stops questioning who is the real author of the script. The invisible rope. The invisible rope is a psychological technique that leads people to obey without appearing coercive. It is the subtle use of presence, tone, rhythm, and assumptions to guide someone toward a decision or action without them realizing they are being manipulated. As if pulling on a rope that no one can see, the manipulator uses suggestion instead of order, impulse instead of pressure, and the target moves forward believing it was their idea from the beginning. It begins with a change in energy, a calm, firm voice, an expectant silence, a sustained gaze long enough. The manipulator can say, "Let's go," without waiting for confirmation, or simply start walking, trusting that the other person will follow. Or ask a question like, "You'll take care of this, right?" Formulated with such certainty that refusing feels uncomfortable. The rope is not pulled hard. It is pulled with confidence. And the brain, desperate to avoid tension or confusion, simply follows. This tactic is used in seduction, sales, leadership, and manipulation. It works especially well with people who shy away from conflict, are empathetic, or are indecisive. The person who is pushed does not feel pressured, but dragged. The invisible rope plays with rhythm, assumptions, and expectations. The manipulator moves as if there is already an agreement. And, in most cases, that is how it is when the other person realizes what is happening. What makes the invisible rope so powerful is that it leaves no visible traces. There are no screams, no coercion, just the disturbing feeling that you have said yes before even thinking. You have followed the pull, not because you had to, but because it was easier than resisting something that has never manifested. And when you feel the tension in your chest, the rope has already taken you exactly where they wanted you to be. The game of the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge game is the subtle tactic of pretending you don't understand something you understand perfectly, or pretending that another person should understand something they don't. It is the manipulation of the information imbalance that is used to confuse, elevate, or belittle the other person. It's not about what you know. It's about how you use that knowledge to control the emotional terrain of a conversation. This game is based on a psychological bias. Once someone knows something in depth, they forget what it is like not to know. But when used intentionally, this bias becomes a weapon by speaking in jargon, making references, or using complexity where simplicity would suffice. The speaker creates an invisible wall. The other person feels ignorant, intimidated, or inferior, but doesn't quite know why, so they're deferential. On the other hand, the curse of knowledge can also be faked. Someone plays dumb, asks obvious questions, acts confused long enough for you to give too many explanations. And as you speak, reveal, and clarify, you are the one who is exposed. This reversal of roles gives them control, because now it is you who acts, justifies, and reveals your thinking step by step, while they silently collect the map of your mind. This tactic is used in business negotiations, in psychological warfare, in the selection of elites, and even in everyday social power games. Teachers use it to instill respect. Bureaucrats use it to hide their incompetence. Manipulators use it to hide the truth under a sophisticated appearance. The curse of the knowledge game is not about intelligence. It's about influence, whether making you look untouchably informed or inducing others to reveal too much under the illusion that you are catching up. Because once someone feels behind in the conversation, they stop trying to lead it. And whoever controls the rhythm of understanding controls everything. The transfer of trust. The transfer of trust is a psychological tactic that makes someone believe in you and, without realizing it, believe in themselves through your energy. It happens when a person radiates so much certainty, calm, and direction that the emotional state spreads to the other like a current. In moments of doubt, stress, or confusion, people unconsciously look for someone to follow. And whoever is sure of their words, even without proof, becomes the point of reference. Not because they are right, but because they seem to be. Human beings are emotional sponges. We absorb the tone, posture, breathing, the energy. When someone speaks slowly, with relaxed shoulders and a firm gaze, the brain registers security, leadership, strength, and if you're close to that person long enough, you begin to adopt their certainty as your own. If they are not worried, maybe I shouldn't be either. If they say this will work, maybe it will be. The transfer does not occur through logic. It occurs through emotion, through presence. This tactic is used by charismatic leaders, scammers, therapists, cult figures, and master negotiators. They don't always have better answers. They simply present their answers with such clarity and without hesitation that others begin to imitate the state, not the idea. The idea becomes believable because belief is contagious. But the power of the transfer of trust is that it does not stay with the sender. Once the receiver captures it, they feel stronger, bolder, smarter. They begin to make decisions that they previously avoided. They walk differently, talk differently, and take credit without realizing that they have borrowed the emotional impulse from another person to get there. That is what makes it dangerous or transformative, depending on who holds the flame. The delayed compliment. The delayed compliment is one that arrives late enough to seem real. It is the compliment that does not appear at the moment it is expected, when it might seem theatrical or strategic, but arrives later when the moment has passed, when the conversation has cooled, when there is nothing to gain. And that is precisely what makes it so powerful. It is perceived as spontaneous, thoughtful, and sincere. This tactic works because human beings are skeptical of flattery, especially when it comes too quickly. Compliments that are given too soon may seem transactional, manipulative, or rehearsed, but a compliment that comes after the fact avoids those defenses. I've been thinking about what you said before. It has impacted me a lot. I didn't mention it at the time, but you handled it very well. These words sink in more because they seem deserved. The moment they're said makes them seem real. The delay also creates space for emotional contrast. At that moment, a person may have felt insecure, ignored, or even rejected. But when a compliment arrives later, when they least expect it, it rewrites their memory of that moment. Heals, flatters, re-engages them to you. Praise doesn't just feel good. It restores something they didn't know was broken. Expert communicators use this in leadership, seduction, and influence. Instead of over-validating in real time, they hold back enough so that the words seem deliberate. And when the compliment arrives, it is not only heard, it is felt. Resonates. Reopens the door that might have silently closed. Because when someone realizes that you were thinking about him after the conversation is over, he can't help but wonder what else you were thinking. The delayed compliment not only increases confidence, it remains in the ensuing silence, creating an emotional gravity that draws him towards you. The pattern of micro gestures. The pattern of microgestures is a technique of psychological influence that uses subtle rhythmic head movements to create an unconscious agreement. It works by taking advantage of the brain's natural need to imitate others in social environments, especially when those signals come from someone who seems calm, self-assured, or in control. When you nod gently while speaking, especially at key moments, the listener also begins to nod. And once their body begins to agree, their mind closely follows. Start with small nods, barely perceptible, while saying something emotionally charged or persuasive. The rhythm should be natural, smooth, and deliberate. It is not an order, nor a plea, just gentle signals of affirmation. The other person sees it without realizing it, and their subconscious begins to imitate the movement. A slow nod, then another. Suddenly, they are nodding physically before deciding if they agree intellectually. And that disconnection tilts their internal compass towards conformity. This tactic is used by persuasive speakers, therapists, salespeople, and manipulators. They nod their heads while saying things like, "You know, it makes sense," or "It's the right thing to do, isn't it?" The nodding head becomes a silent order wrapped in suggestion. And the more the listener repeats the movement, the more their mind tries to be consistent with it, to agree with the gesture, to align with the energy. The power of head nodding is not in the volume, but in the moment when it is done. If used too obviously, it's unsettling. But if used with precision, it becomes an invisible influence. The listener leaves thinking that they have made the decision themselves, but their body has said yes before their brain has had the opportunity to say no. And by then, the nod has already done its job silently, completely, and irrevocably. The trick of "let me ask you this." The trick of "let me ask you this" is the conversational turn that reverses control without confrontation. Is the phrase that slides smoothly, disarming the flow of dialogue and redirecting it towards your agenda without the other person realizing what has just happened. It does not challenge. It invites. But beneath its calm tone hides one of the most strategic tools of influence, a directional question disguised as curiosity. This tactic works because it sounds innocent, casual, even generous. It implies, "I value your opinion. I want to understand." But its true power lies in how it interrupts momentum. Whether someone is ranting, negotiating, accusing, or explaining themselves, this phrase cuts and then changes the current. "Let me ask you this," followed by a carefully chosen question, completely restructures the situation. "Let me ask you this. If the roles were reversed, how would you feel? Let me ask you this. What outcome do you really expect?" The genius of this trick is that it forces a cognitive shift. The person speaking is no longer explaining their point of view. Now they're answering your question. You have gone from being a passive listener to being the one who guides the intellectual terrain. And since the phrase is used as a bridge, not a wall, it rarely provokes defensiveness. Instead, it invites reflection. It subtly says, "Now we are playing on my field." Manipulators use it to deflect blame. Leaders use it to reduce tension. Coaches use it to reframe failure. It works in discussions, interviews, dates, and negotiations. Because once someone accepts the question, they also accept the framework. And at that moment, they no longer direct the conversation. They are reacting to where you have taken them. Let me ask you this. It sounds like a favor, but it is often the moment when someone gives up control without realizing it. The framework of ambiguity. The framework of ambiguity is a psychological tactic that wraps your message in vagueness, forcing others to project their own meaning onto your words. It is not based on clarity. It is based on interpretation. And the trick is that people not only interpret, but personalize. They take your ambiguity and mold it into something that seems specific, intimate, and true to them. Not because you said it, but because they needed it to mean that. This framework works because the brain hates uncertainty. When someone says something like, "There is something about you that changes things when you are around," or "You have a different kind of energy," it sounds meaningful, but by itself it means nothing. However, the listener leans in, looking for meaning. They assign importance to it. They turn the fog into shape. And the more emotionally hungry they are for clarity, approval, or connection, the more powerfully they fill the voids with what resonates most with them. Manipulators, seducers, cult leaders, therapists, and spiritual influencers often use the framework of ambiguity to create an illusion of depth and insight. They speak in riddles, suggestions, or fragments loaded with emotion. The vagueness seems poetic, personal, special, but it is not tailor-made for the individual. It is designed to appear tailor-made, allowing the individual to adapt it themselves. The genius of the ambiguity framework is that it cannot be questioned because it never asserts anything concrete. If it sinks in, it seems profound. If it doesn't, it can be dismissed as a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, the listener is left emotionally exposed, thinking they have been seen, understood, or chosen, when all they have done is project their own hopes and insecurities onto a carefully constructed mirror with smoke. The secret signal. The secret signal is the silent clue. A gesture, a look, or a movement so subtle that it goes unnoticed by everyone else in the room, but that conveys an unequivocal message to the person it is addressed to. It is not said, it is not explained, but it creates a shared reality between two people while everyone else remains unaware. The power lies not only in the message, but in the intimacy of exclusion. This tactic works because it leverages two deep psychological forces, belonging and control. To be the recipient of a secret signal is to be chosen. It means you know something that others don't. And that feeling of being seen, included, prioritized, creates instant loyalty. A touch on the wrist that says, "Keep calm." A quick movement of the eyes towards the door that says, "We are leaving soon." A small smile, a deliberate pause, an almost imperceptible nod. These signals not only communicate, they connect. In manipulation, the secret signal is often used to create alliances in plain sight, to control group dynamics without saying a word. Two people exchange a look during a meeting, and suddenly, everyone else feels a little off balance. Is something happening that I don't know? Are decisions being made without me? That unease creates confusion, and confusion creates power for those who share the signal. Couples use it, politicians use it, leaders use it, even enemies use it when they need to coordinate without revealing their strategy. The secret signal makes the whole room feel normal. Meanwhile, just below the surface, something else is in motion. A plan, a change, a bond. Its beauty lies in its invisibility. No one can face what they cannot demonstrate. And while the world focuses on the loudest voice, the real decisions are often made in silence, between the eyes of those who know exactly what they are doing. Silent flattery. Silent flattery is a technique that influences people without uttering a single compliment. It works through presence, attention, and subtle cues that say you are important without the need to verbalize it. It is the long gaze that lasts a second longer than normal. The slight tilt of the head as you listen. The pause after they speak, as if savoring their words. It is flattery without praise, validation without vulnerability, and it sinks deeper than most admiration expressed with words. Human beings crave recognition, but not always with words. Sometimes, what we want most is just to feel understood. And that is what silent flattery offers. It creates the illusion that the other person is fascinating, exceptional, somehow different simply by how you observe them. You don't interrupt. You don't rush. You maintain the space as if they were revealing something exceptional. And in that space, their sense of worth expands. Not for what you have said, but for how you have looked at them without saying anything. This tactic is used by seducers, therapists, manipulators, elite salespeople, and charismatic leaders. It eludes skepticism because there are no compliments to deflect, only an atmosphere suggesting importance. It gives a feeling of security. It gives the feeling that it has been earned. But what really happens is that control is exerted. Because the more seen someone feels in your presence, the more they will seek that feeling again. Even if they don't fully understand what attracts them, silent flattery doesn't need grand gestures or praise. It works by creating contrast. In a world of noise and attention-seeking, your stillness becomes magnetic. Your concentration becomes intoxicating. and the person in front of you begins to confuse that silent attention with something deeper. Connection, intimacy, even love, when everything was silence used as a mirror. The trick of relief. The trick of relief is an emotional roller coaster designed to create tension and then immediately relieve it, leaving the other person grateful, loyal, and disarmed without knowing why. It's not just about causing stress. It's about creating a controlled emotional peak, a moment in which the heart races, the mind doubts, or the mood declines, only to be rescued later by the same person who caused it. And that relief, that surge of emotional security, binds quickly and deeply. This is how it works. Someone begins with a preparation that is perceived as a threat, a problem, or a change of tone. Listen, we need to talk about something serious. I'm very disappointed with how that turned out. I hate to be the one to tell you. At that moment, anxiety appears. The body prepares. The listener prepares for judgment, rejection, or loss. And then the twist. But honestly, I think you've handled it better than most people. In fact, you have impressed me. It turns out it's already been fixed. That emotional release, the drop in cortisol, the rise in oxytocin, the unexpected return to safety not only calms, but rewards. The listener feels rescued. He who speaks becomes a savior. And without realizing, the emotional mind links the person who caused the tension with the one who relieved it. Manipulators use this to gain loyalty. Leaders use it to have impact. Even lovers use it to deepen the connection. Because when someone takes you to the limit of discomfort and then takes you out with warmth, your brain will not forget it. It does not focus on tension. It clings to the relief. Whoever provides you that relief becomes the person you trust, even if they were the ones who created the tension in the first place. Temporal frame shift. The temporal frame shift is a psychological tactic that manipulates emotional intensity by changing when a conversation takes place. Past, present, or future. It works by changing perception. When something is overwhelming now, reframing it as if it had already happened can create relief. When someone avoids acting, speaking as if they had already done so can avoid hesitation. And when guilt, shame, or regret dominate, shifting focus to what comes next takes the mind out of stagnation. The power isn't in the words. It is in the moment when the mind is forced to rise up. This tactic is used by therapists, coaches, manipulators, and top negotiators. In a conflict, someone might say, "Looking back, this will probably seem insignificant," which forces the brain to distance itself emotionally and reduces what is at stake. In persuasion, they might say, "Imagine how good you will feel when this is over," guiding the listener's emotions towards a desired future. Or, more subtly, "You have already made a decision, haven't you?" Reframing hesitation as something from the past, creating a psychological impulse to align behavior with that timeline. The temporal frame shift doesn't tell people what to think. It tells them when to feel it. And that change in timeline changes the emotional gravity of the moment. A person who gets stuck in guilt can receive a boost forward with future language. An undecided buyer can be pushed into action if they are spoken to from the imaginary relief of having already decided. Movement is created where there was stillness, direction where there was doubt. The genius of temporal frame shift is that it doesn't have to be logical. It just has to be vivid because the mind can only exist in one verb tense at a time. And whoever controls that verb tense controls the emotional tone of the conversation, whether it's evasion, pressure, or comfort. The temporal frame shift makes the future feel present, the present feel finished, and the past seem irrelevant. All in one sentence.